Tonight, step into a different fourth year at Hogwarts. Not the bewildered Gryffindor boy flung into a deadly tournament he never asked for, but a Slytherin Harry Potter, already watching, already planning, already tightening his grip around the Triwizard Cup like a noose. In the familiar story, Harry stumbles. He survives dragons and lakes and mazes through instinct, fear, and a kind of reckless courage that borders on desperation. Luck seems to follow him. Wands connect at the right moment. Allies arrive in the nick of time. The grave in Little Hangleton waits for him at the end of a portkey he never meant to touch. But what if none of that was luck? What if, from the moment the Goblet of Fire's blue flames first rose in the Great Hall, Harry knew he was being hunted and chose to hunt back? This is important. Imagine a Harry sorted into Slytherin on his first night, not by accident, but by the hat's quiet recognition of what already lived beneath the scar: ambition, calculation, the hard, cold willingness to do what others would not. Years under Snape's watchful eye, years observing Draco Malfoy's effortless command of pureblood politics, years learning how Slytherin House turns gossip into weapons and favors into invisible chains. By the time the tournament is announced, this Harry understands something Canon Harry never truly grasps: every piece of public magic is also a public battlefield. So, when the goblet appears, he does not wait to be chosen. He studies it. He listens. He watches who lingers near it too long, who glances at Moody, who flinches when Barty Crouch Sr. speaks. He remembers that Voldemort needs his blood, that any grand spectacle at Hogwarts is an invitation to manipulation. In this version, he does not simply dread the tournament. He decides to weaponize it before it can consume him. Not Dumbledore, who had always believed the boy's innocence was his greatest shield. Not Hagrid, who had always trusted Harry's heart more than his cunning. Not Sirius, who had always wanted James's son to be a mirror of Gryffindor bravado. None of them see the other possibility, that the boy who lived might become the boy who plots. Here, the tasks are not obstacles, but instruments. A dragon is not only a threat, it is a spectacle through which public opinion can be turned. A frozen lake is not just a rescue, it is a stage on which rivals can be quietly indebted or quietly drowned. A maze is not merely a labyrinth, it is the perfect cover for sabotage, disappearance, and controlled encounters with whoever is really steering the tournament from the shadows. This Harry has learned from Snape how to move unseen, from Draco how to trade secrets, from Slytherin itself how to turn every rule into a loophole. He sees the tournament as a grand chessboard laid out under enchanted ceilings and ministry eyes. Each task becomes part of a larger plan: expose the hand of Barty Crouch Jr. without revealing his own, drag Dumbledore's secrets into the light, and, most dangerously of all, choreograph Voldemort's return on his own terms. In this world, the grave in Little Hangleton is not the end of a helpless journey, but a destination chosen with care. The portkey is not an ambush, it is a chain he has already wrapped around his own wrist, knowing exactly where it leads. The question is not whether Voldemort will rise, but who will truly hold power in that cemetery, the Dark Lord reborn, or the boy who walks in already knowing the script. We will move through this altered tournament step by deliberate step, task by task, watching how one Slytherin decision at the start reshapes everything. Because in this maze, the most dangerous player is not waiting at the center. He is the one quietly guiding every path that leads there. To understand how Harry becomes the quiet architect of a tournament, we must first return to the first choice he never truly made: the sorting. The stool. The hat pressing down, not as a relic of school tradition, but as the first voice to offer him a different kind of safety. In this story, he does not resist. The Dursleys have already taught him that adoration curdles into punishment, that standing out paints a target on thin skin and thinner arms. So when the hat whispers of Slytherin, of ambition as armor and power as a shield, he listens. This is important. It speaks of self-protection, of never being helpless on a kitchen floor again, of learning the kind of magic that does not wait for rescue. Gryffindor is framed as a stage, Slytherin as a fortress. He chooses the fortress. The descent into the dungeons is not a fall from grace, it is an education in hidden costs. Snape marks him not as a lion to be broken, but as a snake to be sharpened. The man's cold mentorship is a grave kind of attention, all cutting remarks and withheld approval. Yet behind it, Harry senses a plan: survive, learn, never show your full hand. Draco's arrogance becomes another lesson, a living replica of what empty pedigree looks like when it mistakes noise for power. The older Slytherins teach him the rules that are never written on house banners. Favor is a debt. Secrets are collateral. Every friendship has an escape clause. By second year, the Chamber of Secrets is not only a horror beneath the school, it is a revelation about legacies. He hears Parseltongue echo off wet stone and understands that bloodlines are stories written in magic rather than marble. The basilisk is a weapon someone left waiting. Tom Riddle's diary is not just a violation of Ginny Weasley's mind, it is proof that the past can reach forward like a hand through water and close around your throat. Harry walks out of that year knowing that names survive in more ways than graves. Third year refines him further. The prisoner of Azkaban becomes a study in misdirection. Not Dumbledore, who had watched the Marauders as boys and still failed to see the full pattern. Not Hagrid, who had loved too easily. Not Sirius, who had rotted for 12 years in a cell built from a single, unchallenged assumption. Harry learns that adults keep truths compartmentalist, that even the kind ones will let a child stand in front of a werewolf with half the facts. Emotionally, the hunger remains. He still wants connection, still aches when he watches other students slide into easy companionship. But in Slytherin he discovers that loyalty is rarely unconditional. Information is a currency that buys temporary safety, vulnerability is a debt collector that always returns. Dumbledore's twinkling gaze becomes another mask, another charm laid over omissions he can feel but not yet name. The grave was empty, he thinks, whenever the headmaster speaks of destiny and protection. Empty of the explanations he deserves. By the time the Goblet of Fire arrives, Harry no longer believes in fair games. He believes in leverage, in contingencies, in striking first. So when a tournament built on binding contracts is announced, he does not see a spectacle. He sees a board, and he is already calculating where the blood will fall. From here, every task becomes an instrument, every rule a possible weapon. The question is no longer whether the tournament will be rigged, but who will realize and when. The announcement comes on a night thick with ceremony. Candles float like patient stars above the Great Hall, banners hang heavy with house colors, and the air tastes of roast meat and anticipation. It looks like a feast. It feels like a prelude. Dumbledore rises. The hall quiets. His voice, warm and measured, rolls out over the students as if this is merely another chapter in a long, comforting story of magical tradition and inter-school friendship. He speaks of unity, of the ancient tournament returning, of schools once divided by distance, now joined by courage. He smiles as he says it. Harry listens, but not to the words. This is important. He watches the staff table instead, cataloguing expressions the way other students catalogue Quidditch scores. Not Dumbledore, who had arranged this spectacle and now radiates grandfatherly delight. McGonagall's lips are thin with worry. Karkaroff's eyes gleam too brightly. Madame Maxime measures the room as if weighing it. At the far end, Snape's expression tightens, a minute contraction around the eyes that says more than any speech. Snape knew the rules of old magic. Snape did not like what he was hearing. Around Harry, Slytherin House reacts as Slytherin always has, not with cheers, but with calculations. The older students lean together, voices low. Ministry prestige, international alliances. The chance to stand in front of the world and shape what the world believes is true about Hogwarts, about Britain, about the boy who lived. Draco's drawl cuts through the murmurs, soft and poisonous. If judges can award points, judges can be persuaded. The joke is thin. The implication is not. No one at the table laughs. The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow, but the world still believes in symbols and names and contracts written in blood and fire. Now Dumbledore is inviting a binding artifact into a castle already crawling with secrets. Harry's gaze slides to the goblet of fire when it appears, rough-hewn, ancient, throwing off blue-white flames that lick at the air like a living thing. An object of binding magic, badly explained, placed in the middle of a school filled with enemies and unknown agendas. A replica of safety, nothing more. He hears the rules, the age line, the assurances that no underage student can cross this boundary, that the goblet cannot be fooled, that the contract it forges is absolute. He hears the lie in the certainty. Lily was a charms prodigy, and Harry has spent 3 years under Snape's quiet, vicious tutelage learning where rules bend, where wards thin, where old protections crack under newer spells. If someone intends to reach him through this tournament, they will need his name in that fire. They will need his blood at the end of the path it creates. That means the goblet is not just a risk. It is a lever. It is timing. It is a doorway he can choose to open first. So the decision begins to take shape, not as a reckless impulse, but as a cold, deliberate plan. If there is to be a board, he will seize it. If there are to be rules, he will learn them, test them, and quietly rewrite them before anyone realizes the game has changed. He will not wait to be hunted through tasks designed by strangers and corrupted by hidden hands. He will decide where the dragons stand. He will decide which lake hides which secret. He will decide when the grave stops being symbolic and becomes real again. And as the goblet's flames flare higher, casting greenish shadows over stone and skin, Harry finds himself wondering not how to avoid the fire, but how to step into it on his own terms. How to make sure that when the tournament finally burns, he is not the only one who screams. Because somewhere in this castle, someone is already plotting his sacrifice. They do not yet understand that their victim is also their executioner. The grave of Canon is shallow. The same year still unfolds, tents like bright replicas of kingdoms on a hillside, a stadium roaring with impossible magic, a sky split by green. But in this story, the boy under that sky is already Slytherin, already watching for the hand behind the wand. At the Quidditch World Cup, he does not only gape at Veela and firework leprechauns. He times things. How long between the first scream and the first aura? Which ministry officials run toward the chaos and which vanish into it? This is important. He notes the tremor in Barty Crouch Sr.'s voice, the way Ludo Bagman laughs too loudly as if sound itself were a charm against consequence. Names become pieces, pieces become a plan. When the dark mark blooms over the trees, he feels fear, yes, but it is a cold, articulate fear, threaded with calculation. Who cast it? Who benefits? Who is quick to condemn and who is curiously quiet? He watches wands, eyes, and silences. He walks away from the ruined campsite not just shaken, but cataloguing. He will remember which tents were empty too quickly. He will remember which stories change in the retelling. Back at Hogwarts, Mad-Eye Moody limps into the Great Hall, and the story seems to realign with canon. A scarred aura. A paranoid legend. But Slytherin Harry studies the man like a puzzle whose edges do not quite fit. The flask. The constant vigilance that feels almost theatrical. Not Dumbledore, who had brought this storm into the castle and called it protection. In the defense classroom, when the unforgivable curses arc through the air, Harry does not only recoil from the Cruciatus. He turns quietly to the room, who flinches when the spider writhes, who leans forward, eyes bright, when Moody speaks of power that bypasses rules. He notes that Dumbledore allows this lesson, this spectacle of sanctioned cruelty, and wonders why. What truth is the headmaster testing for? What kind of children is he trying to forge? Pattern interrupt, Draco Malfoy is not simply a jeering boy at a wand's length. He is a potential ally with a father in every drawing room that matters. Their exchanges become veiled, edged with irony instead of open war. Information traded for information, ministry gossip for castle rumors, Slytherin passwords for whispers about the Board of Governors. With Snape, too, hostility curdles into something subtler. Detentions become debates conducted in low voices over simmering cauldrons, each man weighing how much of himself to reveal. Not Hagrid, who had once dragged him into a world of magic without explaining its cost. Not Sirius, who had offered escape without a plan. None of the adults around him are unquestioned anymore. The tournament is announced, the goblet burns blue, and every cheering face becomes a mask he does not trust. The grave was empty. The faith he might have buried in others is gone. He walks the same corridors, hears the same warnings, but every smile, every lesson, every whispered caution now passes through the mind of a boy who has stopped believing rescue is coming. He is preparing to save himself, or to damn himself on his own terms. And when his name will rise from blue fire, he will know it is not an accident. It is an opening. He is preparing to save himself, or to damn himself on his own terms. The Hall will think this is the moment the story slips out of his grip. It is not. This is the moment he tests whether the noose he has tied will tighten around his own throat or someone else's. When the goblet spits out the fourth name, the silence is the same as in canon. The blue-white flame, the drifting scrap of parchment, the slow, incredulous reading of the words. Harry Potter. But in this timeline, the stillness inside Harry is not shock. It is calculation. He knew this was the most visible point of failure in his plan. If the goblet did not speak, then somewhere, in the dark beyond the Great Hall, another hand was already moving his grave into place. This is important. The choice did not begin with the fire. It began weeks earlier in the library's farthest row, where the dust is thick and the lamps burn low. Harry sits beneath the watchful eyes of dead headmasters, copying out passages on binding magic and identity wards, tracing with his quill every place the wording blurs into uncertainty. He reads about the ancient tournaments where champions died because a cup of blue fire decided their fate. And he thinks, what if the champion decided first? He cannot do this alone. Not Dumbledore, who had wrapped the castle in an age line and called it safety. Not Hagrid, who had already let slip too many hints about dragons and danger. Not Sirius, who had written letters full of worry and impulse but no method. Harry turns instead to the two people in Hogwarts, who understand both ambition and fear. Draco comes first, dragged in by insult and curiosity. The Slytherin common room is a cave of whispers. Harry uses them. He sketches the outline. The goblet does not see faces. It sees entries bound to schools, to categories of allegiance. What if a name could be entered as something other? Draco scoffs, then hesitates when Harry repeats the rules back to him with unnerving precision. Loopholes, he suggests, not brute force. A replica of a school on parchment, a constructed affiliation, a technical truth the goblet's magic cannot refuse. Snape is more dangerous. Harry approaches him through potions, asking about the theory of stabilizing volatile mixtures, about how magic recognizes the hand that stirs the cauldron. From there, it is a short, careful step to questions about contracts, signatures, blood. Lily was a charms prodigy, Snape says once, almost despite himself. And in that unguarded moment, Harry recognizes a man who has spent a lifetime understanding how rules bend without quite breaking. Together, in conversations that never name the goblet but orbit it relentlessly, they assemble a method. A layered charm on the parchment so the goblet reads Hogwarts and something else. A timing plan to ensure his entry is last, so any hidden saboteur must either reveal their own interference or risk losing their window. Harry does not want to avoid the trap. He wants to see its shape. His goal is brutal in its clarity. By choosing the tournament, he forces whoever needs his blood to act where everyone is watching. The tasks become stages, the scores a smokescreen. If Voldemort must rise, Harry will decide when and where and under whose protections. So when Dumbledore's voice cuts through the uproar, "Did you put your name in the goblet of fire?" This Harry can no longer hide behind ignorance. Nor can he waste the power of the truth. He lifts his eyes, feels a dozen plots tighten around him, and answers with something far more dangerous than yes or no. He answers in a way that makes everyone in that room wonder whose game they have been playing. He answers with a question that is not a question at all. What does the magic say, Professor? The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow. This is important. Here, in the cramped antechamber that smells of stone, sweat, and old fear, something else is empty, the role Harry has played for 14 years. He does not stammer. He does not plead. He watches. Dumbledore's fingers tighten on his forearm. Blue eyes sharpen. Not kind now, but cutting, and the room seems to narrow around that gaze. "Did you put your name in the goblet of fire?" He repeats, quieter, as if volume were a charm that might pry open truth. Harry lets his pulse race and his breathing hitch, because fear is a useful replica of innocence, and Slytherin has taught him that the right performance is its own kind of magic. "I didn't," he says, and the lie is not in the words, but in the omissions wrapped around them. He did not place his name in the goblet. He merely arranged for someone else to do it. Not Dumbledore, who had long trusted that legilimency was a private key to every frightened child. Not Hagrid, who had once wept over a baby in the ruins of a cottage. None of them knew how many evenings Harry had spent under the green hangings of the Slytherin common room, learning to feel the brush of an intrusive mind and turn his thoughts sideways. Dumbledore's magic presses, light as a fingertip on glass, a flicker, a searching. Harry meets his gaze and offers up what he has prepared, the memory of his name bursting from the goblet. The cold plunge of dread, the genuine outrage of his classmates. He lets those rise, bright and chaotic, like a storm on the surface of a deep lake. Beneath, where the plan coils, he is silent. Moody leans against the wall, the false eye whirring. Barty Crouch Jr. had expected a Gryffindor marionette, all impulse and wounded pride. What he sees instead is a boy who does not babble, who does not waste words, who answers Karkaroff's shouted accusations with a single measured sentence, "Why would I want this?" Why indeed? The question lands too cleanly. Moody's instincts, honed in real war and corrupted in Azkaban, prickle. There is another hand on the board. Perhaps more than one. Snape stands in the shadows, arms folded, face arranged in habitual contempt. Yet, as Harry absorbs the headmaster's outrage without flinching, as he deflects Dumbledore's gaze with the smallest tilt of his head, something shifts. Severus had seen first years crumble under less. This composure is not accidental. It feels practiced. It feels like a child who has spent years knowing that being understood is dangerous. Lily was a charms prodigy, and somewhere, buried in the boy's stillness, Snape catches the echo of her meticulous restraint. A terrible thought occurs to him. What if Potter is not drifting through the year on luck and arrogance? What if he is executing a plan that even Dumbledore has not fully mapped? The room fills with declarations, denials, oaths to the integrity of the tournament. Every adult is lying. To the Ministry, to each other, to themselves. Dumbledore lies about how much he saw in Harry's mind. Moody lies about how surprised he is. Karkaroff lies about caring for his champion more than his own skin. Snape lies about his indifference. And Harry, who knows too much and says too little, stands in the center and quietly resolves that if they insist on making him the axis of their schemes, then he will choose the direction of the spin. He will let the tournament proceed. He will walk into every task they have rigged. But not for the reasons any of them think. Because somewhere beyond this room, in a grave that should have held a war's ending, something else is waiting to rise. And Harry intends to decide how and when and on whose terms it comes back alive. He is not improvising. He is drafting a war. Survival is the surface of it, the visible charm on the water. Beneath, the plan runs deeper, colder, patient as a serpent beneath stone. Harry does not merely want to live through the Triwizard Tournament, he intends to use it. This is important. The maze, the lake, the dragons are not obstacles in his mind. They are instruments. He knows, first, that someone inside Hogwarts has fed his name to the goblet. A hidden Death Eater, close enough to the staff, to the wards, to the very bones of the castle. In canon, that man was Barty Crouch Jr. Here, Harry does not yet have the name, but he has the pattern. The subtle nudges, the sudden inexplicable kindness from a new professor, the way his path keeps being cleared. So he chooses not to flee the board, but to force the traitor to keep playing. If the tournament continues, the saboteur must reveal his methods. If the tournament is his grave, then it will also be theirs. At the same time, he is watching Dumbledore. Years of half-answers have accumulated like silt. Questions about his parents, about that Halloween night, about why his life has been permitted to unfold in neglect and danger. Not Dumbledore, who had supposedly guarded him, who had left him on a doorstep like a replica of a child rather than the child himself. Harry has read enough fragments of prophecy, heard enough whispers of weapon and sacrifice to understand that the headmaster's mercy has limits. The tournament, with foreign judges and ministry officials and reporters, becomes a public crucible in which Dumbledore cannot quietly maneuver him toward death. Harry will drag every decision into the light. Slytherin values do not make him kinder, they make him clearer. Self-preservation, yes, but not the coward's version. Ambition, but not for glory alone. Calculated risk, chosen with the same precision Lily used when she laid protections in blood and fire. Better a controlled blaze now, he thinks, than an inferno later when Voldemort rises on his own terms. If the Dark Lord needs his blood to return, then Harry's blood is not just a weakness, it is leverage. So he studies the tournament as theatre. The dragons will be watched by the world. He can turn a stolen broom and a whispered alliance with a Slytherin classmate into a demonstration of competence that makes the ministry hesitate before treating him as a child. The Black Lake will hold hostages. He can reveal or conceal whom he chooses to save, crafting a story about loyalty and ruthlessness that unsettles his enemies. The maze, with its shifting walls and buried magic, will be the perfect place to test whether Dumbledore will intervene when the grave yawns open. Because Harry knows Voldemort is coming. The grave was empty in 1981. The war never truly ended. If a Dark Lord requires your blood to rise, do you run until he finds you in some unguarded moment? Or do you choose the battlefield and lace it with your own traps? And if you choose the latter, how close do you stand to the edge of becoming something darker than the hero they wanted? He has already chosen. The tournament will not be his escape. It will be his design. And when the cup turns portkey and the world tears sideways, it will not be an accident. It will be the door he has been building in secret, waiting to decide who walks back through it alive. The door he is building begins long before the graveyard. It begins with a cup that is not a cup, and with a boy who has learned to listen when ancient magic hums. The Goblet of Fire is not a pretty prop on a plinth. It is an artifact in the oldest sense, a vessel that has drunk centuries of oaths until it has grown almost alive with them, its wood darkened by promise and broken bone. This is important. The goblet does not simply read a name and spit blue flames. It weighs identity, intent, and the subtle grain of a magical signature, the way a wand chooses a wizard and remembers. Not Dumbledore, who had placed his faith in the tournament's binding contract as though the words were stone, ever truly mapped its inner workings. Not Hagrid, who had spoken of it with the rough reverence he reserved for dangerous beasts. Not Sirius, who had only ever seen its smoke from a distance in some half-forgotten story of school glory. But Harry listens. Harry watches the way the flames lean toward certain parchments, the way the hall's wards tighten when it is lit, the way even Snape's gaze sharpens when the goblet begins to burn. Snape's theory is not written anywhere safe. It lives in marginalia, in the bitter ink of a man who has spent too many nights cataloguing the failures of other people's protections. Harry steals glimpses of that ink, and later of Crouch's neat obsessive notes in a borrowed folder, and he begins to understand the goblet does not select champions by name alone. It distinguishes them by a triad, personal name, school marker, sponsoring authority, woven together into a single binding phrase. A simple plan would be to force a fourth school into its reckoning, to carve Hogwarts 2 beside Durmstrang and Beauxbatons like some crude replica of Karkaroff's banner. That is what Barty Crouch Jr. will try in the story Harry is supposed to inhabit. But Harry is Slytherin, and he has learned that the most elegant charm is the one that bends what already exists instead of shattering it. So he studies the runes etched into the plinth. He traces, in ink and memory, the curling sigil that stands for Hogwarts, Castle, Four Towers, unity bound by shared authority. He asks a different question. What if the goblet could be persuaded that Hogwarts is not a single whole thing, but a category with a shadow, a second unsanctioned pattern hanging just beneath the first? The method is delicate. A forged school rune, not invented but distorted. A binding phrase whispered at the exact moment the goblet drinks the names. A sponsoring authority that is not a headmaster, not a ministry, but something older, written in blood and ward stone. The goblet cannot be lied to about who he is. Harry James Potter, alive, scarred. That truth is fixed, but it can be misled about under whose banner he steps forward. He threads his parchment through that ambiguity, neither fully Hogwarts nor fully foreign, a liminal category that no rule anticipates. The grave was empty, the category will be too, until he inhabits it. And then the pattern interrupt comes, not in the flames, but in Harry's mind, if he can poison the ground of authority itself. Then anyone who tries to use the goblet against him must stand where he has already salted the earth. When the cup turns portkey, it will not be their contract. It will be his. The tournament, from that moment, is no longer a contest. It is a closed circle of conditions he has defined, waiting for the Dark Lord to step into them. But no circle, however carefully drawn, holds forever if the caster stands alone. A rigged tournament is not only a feat of magic and will, it is a problem of witnesses, of accomplices, of people who will swear they saw nothing when the grave is empty and a story is questioned. Draco Malfoy is the first problem, and the first solution. Their rivalry has burned for 3 years, a slow corrosive thing fed by house pride and inherited grudges. Yet when the goblet spits out Harry's name and the Slytherin common room fills with cold, delighted speculation, Draco is the one who notices that Harry does not look surprised. He looks prepared. This is important because Draco recognizes something of himself in that stillness, calculation, not panic. The alliance that follows is not friendship. It is a ceasefire written in the language Slytherin understands best: mutual leverage. Draco sees a chance to bind the boy who lived to Slytherin's fortunes, to turn a scandal into a banner for his house. Harry sees a boy whose father sits at Death Eater tables, who hears things at that grave dark edge of politics that no professor will ever admit aloud. Together they sketch a possibility. If the tournament is already compromised, why not use it to expose the very plots that threaten their house from within? Severus Snape hovers at the edge of this arrangement like a shadow that has learned to listen. As a spy for Dumbledore and a former Death Eater, he has spent years reading patterns in poisoned air. He recognizes the fingerprints of external interference on the goblet long before anyone else dares say the word tampering. Not Dumbledore, who had convinced himself that ancient artifacts obeyed his moral expectations. Not Hagrid, who had faith in the fairness of contests he barely understood. Not Sirius, who had rotted in Azkaban while other men refined subtler chains. Snape says nothing openly. Instead, he begins to ask Harry questions in detentions that are not really punishment. What do you know of contract magic? What happens when a binding charm is invoked under false pretenses? He offers theory, not instruction, tracing the edges of the trap without stepping inside it. Harry takes notes in his mind and never on parchment. Plausible deniability is its own ancient charm. Within Slytherin, information moves like water through stone. First years trade corridor rumors for help with essays. Older students barter overheard staff conversations, Crouch's stiff unease, Karkaroff's hunted eyes for future favors. Passwords change, but the culture does not. Secrets are the only true currency, and Harry learns to spend carefully. A single whispered comment from Draco about his father's sudden interest in the Ministry's security wards can be worth more than a week of formal lessons. Hermione and Ron stand outside this circle, and that exclusion is a wound Harry chooses and reopens every day. Their faith in Dumbledore, in rules that mean what they claim to mean, makes them liabilities to a plan built on ambiguity and moral greyness. He lets them believe he is improvising, drowning, surviving by instinct. He lets them think the tournament is happening to him, not through him. In truth, he is surrounded by allies who could deny him under Veritaserum and enemies who think they are using him as bait. Only Harry sees the full board. Only Harry knows which square is marked for blood. And in the quiet hours before the first task, when even the Slytherin common room falls silent, he begins to suspect that somewhere beyond the castle walls, someone else is watching the same board, waiting for him to move first. He decides the first task will not be about him. It will be about them. About what happens when you place a dragon in a stone arena, surround it with schoolchildren, and call it tradition. In the weeks before the task, Harry reframes the entire story in his mind. The dragon is not an obstacle, it is an instrument. The arena is not a battlefield, it is a laboratory. This is important. He will not simply survive fire. He will measure how the Ministry responds to it, how foreign champions reveal themselves under it, how Hogwarts protections hold or fail when confronted with ancient living weapons that should have been left sleeping on some forgotten mountain grave. He begins with information, not truth, something sharper, something that cuts in different directions depending on who holds it. Through Draco, with all the easy arrogance of a boy repeating gossip, he lets Victor Krum overhear that Hungarian horntails have a blind spot directly beneath the jaw, that a quick, straight assault there will force the head up and a flame away. It is not a lie, not exactly, but it is incomplete, and Harry knew that half-knowledge around dragons is its own kind of curse. Fleur receives a different fragment, carried on the polite tongue of a Beauxbaton girl who thinks she is trading in harmless secrets, that horntails are briefly disoriented by overlapping light sources, that reflections and sudden flares can confuse their aim. Cedric, through a Hufflepuff prefect who owes Harry a quiet favour, hears that the tail is slower than the head, that the safest path is behind, if one is patient and precise. Each tip is real, each tip is also a trap, because none of them mention how quickly a dragon adapts. His plan is simple in outline and labyrinthine in execution. By seeding conflicting intelligence, he turns the task into a live fire test. How does Krum react when his direct assault meets a dragon that has already lifted its head? How does Fleur improvise when the beast learns to shut its eyes against sudden light? How long will Cedric trust the tail's rhythm before it faints? Harry watches for patterns. The judges scoring when courage becomes recklessness. The ministry officials' hands tightening on their wands, the exact second someone decides that spectacle has crossed into scandal. Not Dumbledore, who had agreed to this grave carnival under the guise of international unity. Not Hagrid, who had called the dragons beautiful and left it at that. For himself, there is no improvising with a broom and a prayer. Lily was a charms prodigy, and whether he knows that or not, her precision lives in his magic. He layers contingencies, summoning charms primed on specific stones, distraction hexes keyed to his heartbeat, a calculated stumble that draws the Horntail's fire toward reinforced stands. Quietly, he arranges a signal with Snape, a flare of green against the dragon's flame, to test how far staff will let him push, how close to the edge of catastrophe he can walk before an adult intervenes. They do not at first. The dragon roars, the crowd screams, the air tastes of ash and iron, and Harry moves through it like a figure in someone else's nightmare, always one step ahead, never quite safe. The judges hesitate. The ministry watches. The staff waits until the stands themselves begin to protest, until students rise, until the sound of fear outweighs the thrill. He walks out with the golden egg in his arms and something far more valuable in his mind. A dossier written in firelight and panic. How Krum calculates, how Fleur adapts, how Cedric trusts, how Dumbledore delays, how the ministry flinches only when the crowd demands it. The grave was empty in that arena. No one claimed responsibility until it was almost too late. And Harry files that away, because the next time he dances with fire, he intends to choose exactly whose silence will burn. The dragon had roared and the crowd had screamed, but the loudest sound Harry carried away from the first task was silence. The silence of officials who looked at scorched students and saw only spectacle. The grave was empty in their eyes, risk went in, applause came out, and nothing human was buried there. So when the golden egg opened and shrieked like something drowning, Harry heard more than a riddle. He heard a controlled leak of future danger, an announcement that the tournament intended to reach past the champions and into the dormitories, the common rooms, the people he allowed himself to care about. This is important. The sound said, "We will come for what you cannot afford to lose." Publicly, he made a performance of ignorance. He winced with everyone else when the egg screamed in the Slytherin common room, snapped it shut with a grimace, let Draco mock and Pansy speculate, and the story grow teeth. Short, then, alone, he slipped beneath the Black Lake's surface days later than he needed to. Gillyweed and a timed bubblehead charm layered with the precision of someone who had watched Lily was a charms prodigy, even if he did not know her name for it. The Mer song was clearer than in canon because he had prepared for it to be clear. And he deciphered it early. That early knowledge became a weapon. For 3 quiet weeks, he walked Hogwarts as a boy apparently out of his depth, while in truth he knew that hostages would be taken, that the lake would become a grave if anything went wrong. He let teachers see him yawn in class, let Snape sneer about divided attention, let Moody watch him with that unsettling, measuring gaze. Not Dumbledore, who had orchestrated tournaments and trials, nor the Ministry, who saw only contracts and glory, realized that Harry was already planning around the theft of living bodies. He chose his confidences with surgical care. Cedric, who had shared the dragon hint, received the real key in return: take it to the bath, listen underwater, do not waste time on brute force translations. Fleur and Crumb were given truth cut into fragments. A mention of sound distortion here. A hint about thinking like a creature there. Enough to keep them from failure, not enough to keep them from riskier improvisations that would stretch them thin and expose how they protected their own. Around Moody, Harry became almost childlike. He asked about magical contracts, about what happened if a hostage were harmed, about whether the lake itself counted as the tournament's responsibility. He watched for flinches, for overcorrections, for the way Moody's answers sometimes arrived too quickly, as if he already knew the structure of the task. Not Hagrid, who had only seen the dragons. Not Sirius, who had only guessed at plots from the forest's edge. The false professor's knowledge smelled like foreknowledge, and Harry filed that scent beside the polyjuice and a hip flask. When the second task finally dragged his chosen hostage beneath the surface, the riddle stopped being hypothetical. The tournament had touched his inner circle with impunity. This is important. It proved that contracts and tradition would happily wrap themselves around the throats of those he loved and call it fair play. As he cut his hostage free and rose toward the light, he was already designing a different abduction, a counter-kidnapping not bound by school rules or judges' scores. The night Voldemort rose, Harry decided. The Dark Lord would not be the only one waiting at an altar with stolen blood and stolen bodies. He broke the surface to applause and screaming and the white roar of the crowd. But Harry was not listening for cheers. He was listening for hesitation. For the first indrawn breath that meant someone powerful had just watched him disobey and was deciding what that disobedience meant. Beneath the Black Lake, the choice had not been impulsive. Not this time. The merpeople's spears had crossed in front of him when he cut Ron free, when he reached for Hermione, when he refused to leave Gabrielle hanging in that eerie, suspended sleep. In canon, the story says he panicked, that he could not bear to abandon anyone. Here, he still could not bear it. But he also watched, very carefully, who tried to stop him and how far they were willing to go. The Merchief's eyes had been grave, ancient, and assessing. Harry raised his wand, slowly, not as a threat but as a question. A ring of light, a simple charm, expanded from the tip and dissolved before it touched the hostages, a visible declaration that he understood the boundary of their orders. He pointed once to the bound figures, once to his own chest, then to the surface, then flattened his palm in a deliberate gesture of promise. He knew they had been used as pieces on someone else's board. Pawns in a school spectacle. This is important. When he cut the last rope and gathered more than his allotted hostage, he did it knowing the clock was already bleeding away his points. He did it knowing the judges would be forced to choose between punishing compassion and rewarding it. He let the Grindylows slow him. He did not fight as hard as he could have. He wanted the margin close enough that any leniency would be obvious, any cruelty unmistakable. On the platform, dripping and shivering, he listened. Bagman's booming praise came first, indulgent, eager to turn near disaster into a better story for the stands. Crouch's mouth thinned. His voice, when it emerged, was cold and exacting, arguing that rules were rules, that the plan had been explained, that the boy had overstepped the contract. Not Dumbledore, who had twinkled and folded his hands and spoken of the nobility of placing others before oneself as if the moral had been his design from the beginning. Harry filed it all away. Bagman would forgive anything that made the tournament shine. Crouch would sacrifice children to keep a form signed and a schedule intact. Dumbledore would stand between them, not to shield Harry, but to preserve his own legend of benevolent control. The grave was empty, where simple trust in adults should have been. And under the water, the merpeople had seen him hesitate before drawing his wand on them and choose instead to negotiate with light and gesture. They had seen him look at their spears not as weapons, but as proof of their own lack of choice. An understanding passed between them that had nothing to do with gillyweed or golden eggs. The next time strange magic stirred their depths, they would remember the boy who treated them as more than scenery. He had turned a school game into a quiet tribunal, a rehearsal for a coming war. Who would bend rules to save a life? Who would defend the plan even as the lake threatened to become a grave? Who, when the Dark Lord stood fully alive again, would make the same choices on a darker night? Harry stepped away from the judge's table, soaked and silent, already redesigning the final task in his mind. He had tested their reflexes. Next, he would test their limits. And somewhere in the stands, someone who thought they were the only one rigging this tournament felt, for the first time, that something was slipping out of their control. He left the cheering behind like an echo in a grave. The lake, the judges, the applause, all of it receded as he turned his mind toward hedges and shadows and the place where the story would break. Harry did not see the third task's maze as an unknowable horror. He saw design. Hedges grown by magic, paths laid out by staff, obstacles chosen, placed, and monitored. Nothing wild, nothing truly random, every wall a decision, every turning a human choice. This is important, because anything shaped by hands and wands could be read, and anything that could be read could be rewritten. So he began with reconnaissance. Not Dumbledore, who had signed the plans and believed that made them secure. Harry went lower, quieter. Hagrid, with his fondness for oversized plants, was easy to nudge. A question here about growth charms on hedges, a comment there about creatures that disliked tight spaces. Not Hagrid, who had never learned to guard his tongue, who thought Harry's curiosity was only nerves. From him, Harry learned which professors had walked the maze's skeleton before the hedges rose, which spells controlled the shifting walls, which clearings had been marked for spectacular dangers. He listened at doors as well. Staff meetings, half muffled by ancient stone, yielded more. References to monitoring charms woven into the branches, to paths that would flex just enough to keep champions near the center line. He watched, in the days before the task, as professors tested the hedges with jets of light, and he noted how the leaves shivered, how the magic recoiled and then settled. A living lattice of enchantment, responsive, predictable, vulnerable. His goal crystallized with the pattern. Cedric Diggory would not reach the cup. Kroom would be steered away from anything truly lethal. Fleur, if she entered at all, would be quietly protected from the worst of it. and Harry himself would reach the center alone, at the pace and angle he chose to touch the portkey under conditions he had prepared for. Voldemort wanted a victim delivered. Harry intended a rendezvous he controlled. For that, he needed markers. Harmless, forgettable, but humming with intention. Here, the alliance that had begun in the dungeons matured. Snape walked the outer grounds under pretense of inspecting security, his wand hand almost idle. A faint, oily shimmer on one hedge that only a certain counter-charm would recognize. A dusting of potion on another, scentless, that would make nearby creatures drowsy. Draco, sent ostensibly to complain about Slytherin seating for the task, palmed tiny replicas of fallen twigs and stones, each one charmed to glow only to Harry's eyes when he whispered a word. Together they laid a trail of magical breadcrumbs, a hedge that would thin for Crumb but thicken for Cedric. A turn that would feel inexplicably safer, drawing Diggory just a little off the optimal line. A sequence of markers that, followed in order, would lead Harry through the least resistance and into the heart of the maze with his wand already raised. From the stands, the maze would look like chaos. Walls grinding, shadows moving. Champions lost in a green labyrinth that seemed to have a will of its own. But beneath the rustling leaves, one boy had already walked its paths in his mind. He knew which scream would be cut short and which would be answered. He had decided, long before the whistle blew, who would live to see the stars again. And somewhere far beyond the hedges, a grave was empty, and a darker plan waited for him to arrive on time. The hedges waited. The dark mark waited. But before Harry stepped into the maze, he turned to face the one man who seemed to be guiding him toward that graveyard with unnerving precision. Mad-Eye Moody watched him the way a hunter watches a wounded animal that somehow keeps surviving the traps. The magical eye whirred, the scars twisted, the growl of constant vigilance followed him down every corridor. It was protection, on the surface. Underneath, Harry heard something else. Compulsion, obsession, a man who never seemed surprised when danger found the boy who lived, only impatient when it was delayed. This is important. Harry had grown up in Slytherin House, where nothing that convenient was ever free. He mapped the pattern, the two perfect hints before each task, the way Moody appeared after every near-fatal moment, already knowing details Harry had not yet spoken aloud. Not Dumbledore, who had at least pretended to trust chance. Moody behaved as if chance were an insult to his plan. So Harry began to lie. He feigned ignorance over spells he could already cast in his sleep. He let his wand skid a fraction too far in class, mispronounced a hex he had practiced alone until his voice was hoarse, allowed Draco to correct him in the common room with a sneer that was mostly theatre. When Moody intervened, he intervened too sharply. He overcorrected. A casual mention of gillyweed became an almost desperate insistence on underwater breathing. A muttered question about shields produced, days later, a private demonstration of a charm specifically effective against dragonfire. Each overreaction marked another place where the tournament had been touched. Another obstacle that was not what it seemed. The story Moody told of a fair, ancient competition began to look more and more like a replica, hollowed out and refilled with someone else's design. Harry did not test that story alone. Slytherin gossip was its own kind of magic, a web older than any official ward. He listened to seventh years who remembered the real Aura Moody, the one who had trained with their parents. They spoke of a man brutal but principled, a hunter of Death Eaters who despised unforgivables so much he used them only as a last resort, and never with the cold relish this version displayed in class. Not Hagrid, who had grown up far from such politics, not Sirius, who had rotted in Azkaban and missed the shift. But Slytherin students had fathers who had feared Moody, and even they said, "This is not his style." The pivotal test came before the third task. In Moody's office, surrounded by whirling dark detectors and the quiet tick of hidden clocks, Harry spoke softly of his intended strategy. He described in careful detail a plan to race the outer edge of the maze, to rely on speed and fire to blast through anything that moved. It was a lie. Days later, when Bagman paraded them before the towering hedges, Harry felt the wards hum. The outer paths bristled with flame-resistant enchantments, creatures that thrived on heat, curses that punished haste. The maze had shifted to counter a plan he had never meant to use. He knew then. The eye, the scars, the growl of constant vigilance were a mask worn by something narrower and more predictable, a servant following orders transmitted through tasks and traps. By the time the maze opened, Moody was no longer an unknowable threat in Harry's mind. He was a variable. A puppet whose strings led straight back to Voldemort, whose tugs could be timed, whose interference could be used to mark the safest dangerous path. The grave was empty. The Dark Lord was not yet fully alive, and Harry's plan depended on walking into that emptiness at precisely the moment his enemy expected him least. The maze would close around him. The portkey would activate. And somewhere, far from the cheering stands, the truth about who was hunting whom would finally come due. The maze would close around him. The portkey would activate. And in the stillness between one heartbeat and the next, the question finally surfaces: at what point does strategic self-defense become something colder, sharper, indistinguishable from preemptive cruelty? This is important, because Harry has not merely prepared to survive an ambush. He has spent months turning his classmates into unwitting counters on a board only he can see. Fleur's path through the first task was smoothed by a whispered hint about dragon temperament that left her overconfident, a charm-bolstered gust of wind nudging her just a fraction closer to the Horntail's tail than she believed. Crumb was fed false leads about the maze's shifting walls, a carefully curated map that steered him toward Barty Crouch Jr.'s influence and away from the exits. Cedric, most damning of all, walks beneath a shield made of trust, believing Harry's warnings are unvarnished truth when every word has been weighed for how it will play in a graveyard Harry has already seen in his mind. He tells himself it is arithmetic. 1 tournament, 4 champions, dozens of students in the stands, hundreds of lives that will be forfeit if Voldemort returns with no restraints, no witness, no prepared counterstrike. In his Slytherin common room, beneath green light and the slow pulse of the lake above, he has learned that some stories are written in blood before they are ever spoken aloud. If he can shorten the war, if he can force the Dark Lord's resurrection into a narrow corridor of conditions he controls, then the lesser harms of misdirection and calculated risk now will prevent the greater slaughter later. This is where the divergence from Gryffindor idealism becomes a wound. In another story, Harry refuses to sacrifice anyone. He charges into danger alone, insists on fairness even when the magic itself is rigged against him, clings to the belief that clean hands are possible in a dirty war. Here, sorted under the serpent, he has absorbed a different lesson, that purity is a luxury of those who are not already marked. He does not want to be cruel. He is willing to be cruel, briefly, if it means fewer names on future headstones. Not Dumbledore, who had praised his courage in the face of dragons, understands the full extent of the plan. Not Hagrid, who had clapped him on the shoulder and told him to show him what year can do, knows how much of that show is replica and rehearsal. Hermione feels the fracture first. She hears the evasions, sees the gaps where the truth should be, and her unease grows into quiet argument. Knowledge shared is risk shared, but secrecy corrodes. Ron, kept outside the inner circle, tastes humiliation as betrayal. His resentment a raw, ordinary hurt in the middle of extraordinary magic. Draco, watching from the Slytherin table, recognizes something far more unsettling. A rival who thinks like a Malfoy but bleeds for another side. The grave was empty, the Dark Lord not yet fully alive, and Harry has chosen to stand in that emptiness with a ledger instead of a sword. If the war that follows is shorter, if fewer mothers stand over fresh earth, and fewer children learn their parents' faces from photographs, does that justify the lies, the manipulations, the carefully placed dangers in the shadows of the maze? Or has the boy who lived already broken something in himself that no victory can restore? He has already accepted that something in him has cracked. The question becomes how to use the fracture. Canon offers him one immutable fact. Voldemort does not simply want a child's blood. He wants Harry's. The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow, but the protection that clung to Harry's skin was not. The Dark Lord built his resurrection around that singular thread, around blood that had once turned death itself aside. This is important. Of all the moving pieces in the coming ritual, only one is truly irreplaceable, and it is walking the corridors of Hogwarts under Slytherin green. Harry studies that fact the way other students study for exams. If he is the key ingredient, then the cauldron cannot boil without his consent. If his blood is the hinge on which Voldemort's return must turn, then the hinge can be warded, trapped, poisoned. His own veins become leverage, not liability. He does not need to stop the resurrection outright. He needs to decide when it happens, where it happens, and under which unseen conditions the Dark Lord opens his eyes. So he goes to the only place in the castle honest enough to admit what blood can do, the restricted section. Nights when the castle sleeps and the portraits snore in their frames, he moves under disillusionment, fingers tracing cracked spines that whisper of pacts sealed in bone and vows etched in veins. He reads of rituals warped when the victim stepped forward willingly, of bindings that slid sideways when the sacrifice named a price. He learns that magic listens not only to action, but to intention. In class, his questions to Snape are careful, almost bland. A query about the stability of blood replenishing draughts. An idle curiosity regarding what happens if a donor offers blood freely instead of having it taken. Not Dumbledore, who had once spoken of love as if it were the only ancient power worth naming. Not Hagrid, who had brought him into this world of wands and castles. Not Sirius, who had offered him escape. None of them hears the pattern, but Snape hears something, and answers with clipped, reluctant truths about consent, about how willingly given blood can twist the geometry of a rite. From that geometry, Harry sketches a gambit. He will let the ritual proceed, but only through a narrow corridor of conditions. Charms keyed to his conscious assent, layered on his own skin. Counter-curses brewed into his blood. Tiny replicas of more complex spells that will awaken only when torn free. And beyond even that, a quiet appeal to the castle's oldest magic, to the same deep lore that once answered Lily's stand in a nursery. Lily was a charms prodigy, and somewhere in the weave of protections that still hum faintly around him, Harry feels a precedent. Blood can carry more than life. It can carry terms. When he walks toward the portkey, he does not imagine himself a lamb. He imagines a surgeon. The cup is only a doorway. The grave that waits beyond it is for an old version of the Dark Lord, one who believes he understands the cost of Harry's blood. Harry closes his hand around the handle like a man taking up a poisoned scalpel, and the world holds its breath to see which way he will cut. He has felt this place before. Not as a victim stumbling into legend, but as a strategist walking the contours of a battlefield already mapped in his mind. The world slams back into shape around him in a rush of cold and stone and the sour scent of damp earth. Mist curls low over crooked grass. Leaning gravestones jut from the ground like broken teeth, each name a half-erased accusation. Above them all, the riddle tomb rises, pale and jagged, a single marble fang biting into the night. Harry's heart beats hard. But it is steady. This is important. He is not calm because he is unafraid. He is calm because he knew this graveyard before he ever touched the cup. He knew it from dreams that were not dreams, from visions of a yew tree and a snake sliding past a tilted angel, from the way pain had flared in his scar whenever the name Riddle House appeared in obscure ministry, reports Snape had pushed across a desk with wordless precision. He knew it from the pattern in Moody's guidance, too precise to be genuine chance, too focused on one boy's survival to be the impartial training of an aura. Portkeys to isolated locations, drills on what to do if you are separated from allies. A constant, needling insistence that Harry think beyond the task. Who trains a child for abduction unless abduction is part of the plan? The grave was empty, in a way. Not the earth beneath his feet, not the stone above the riddle name, but the official story that this was all random, all unfortunate coincidence. That story had no body in it. Not Dumbledore, who had watched the tournament unfold with that distant, troubled gaze, had ever spoken the full truth aloud. Not Hagrid, who had ferried Harry to dragons and danger with a clumsy, aching pride. Not Sirius, who had raged in a cave and paced like a caged dog, had seen how the pieces fit. Only Harry had the dreams. Only Harry had the motive to let the trap close. So he prepared. Lily was a charms prodigy, and even in death she was still teaching her son. In the quiet between tasks, Harry inked thin, curling runes along his ribs and forearms, lines of protective magic disguised as old scars and Quidditch bruises. He worked with blood, as his mother had once done with replicas and shields, binding a dormant charm into his own veins, a spell that would sleep until called by a very specific resonance, the knitting of his blood into another body. He studied Little Hangleton's history, reading between the lines of dry accounts, old paths, property boundaries. The way Muggles unconsciously avoided the Riddle House Hill. From that, he built a mental map, where wards would be anchored, where gaps might exist, where a boy could run if he ever got free of ropes and ritual. And now the ritual begins. Bone of the Father. flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy. The words fall, as they did in the canon, they are all still pretending to inhabit. The knife bites his arm, the blood steams as it hits the cauldron. But his blood is not obedient. The dormant charm wakes as it mingles with bone and stolen flesh, latching itself to the forming body like a shadow stitched under the skin. It is a conditional curse, not loud enough to be felt, not bright enough to be seen, keyed to resonance rather than command words. Every wand movement this resurrected Dark Lord will make, every spell he will cast, will echo through that hidden tether. Who will truly own whose magic when the night is done? Voldemort rises, pale and terrible, reborn in the graveyard he chose as his stage. He lifts his hands, triumphant, certain that the boy bound to the riddled tomb is only a resource, a symbol, a vessel of power already spent. He does not feel the quiet twist in the pattern of his own magic. He does not see that Harry, wrists raw against the ropes, has already placed one invisible hand on the Dark Lord's future and turned the wheel a fraction off its former course. The circle closes as it always was meant to. Black robes, white masks. The hiss of a voice that once was Tom Riddle and is now something thinner, stretched, but Harry does not watch Voldemort's theatrics. He catalogues. This is important. Ash wand 12 3/4, supple, in the hand of the man who limps, that must be not. Yew and dragon heartstring, of course, in the pale, inhuman hand that gestures as if conducting an orchestra of graves. A hawthorn wand that trembles when its owner laughs. He notes the gaps in the ring as carefully as the wands that glitter. No Lucius, no Snape, no Karkaroff. Names that should be present and are not become as loud as any oath the kneeling figures swear. Not Dumbledore, who had spoken of prophecy and protection, but never of how many ways blood could be used. Not Hagrid, who had told stories by the fire, but never the story of the older, darker rituals that predated Hogwarts itself. Harry knew because he had gone looking, because Lily was a charms prodigy, and James had copied forbidden pages in a Cornwall kitchen while the world believed the grave was empty. The hidden blood curse wakes slowly. It does not blaze or crackle. It tightens. The cut on Harry's arm is only the visible anchor. The real work was done months ago in the careful reweaving of the old resurrection rite so that the blood offered would not only restore but bind. Voldemort raises his wand and for a heartbeat his fingers hesitate, the motion stuttering as if the magic must pull itself through a narrow gate. Harry sees it. The almost falter in the Cruciatus. The infinitesimal delay before the ropes fall away. The way each spell feels a fraction late, as though the Dark Lord is casting across a distance that should not exist. The curse has wrapped itself around the shared blood, drawing Voldemort's life thread closer, knotting it to Harry's in a way that even the graveyard's watching dead cannot name. This is important. So he tests it. He taunts not recklessly, but with precision, provoking the spells he needs. Pain curses to see if agony weakens the tether. Cutting curses to taste how the magic strains, whether the recoil is sharper for the caster than the target. He feigns collapse, lets his voice crack, lets Voldemort believe that the boy is shattering and times each stumble to the rhythm of that invisible pull. When the duel begins in earnest, Harry is already moving toward the moment he has engineered. He does not flee the challenge to bow or the demand to fight like a man. He needs the wands raised together. He needs the cause to sing. The golden thread between holly and yew erupts, and to the Death Eaters it is miracle or aberration. To Harry it is experiment. He watches his parents' echoes emerge, yes, but also the way Voldemort's arm shakes, the way the yew wand bucks as if trying to fly from its master's grip. The magic is not only connecting, it is resisting, dragged backward along a line of blood that refuses to let go. The echoes speak, and Harry listens, but he is also counting. How long the connection holds, how far he can move while the tether is taut, how Voldemort's face tightens with a strain that looks dangerously like fear. When he breaks and runs, it is not a desperate fluke. It is the first successful field test of a plan conceived in the shadow of Cornwall cliffs, refined in Slytherin corridors, and paid for with his own blood. Voldemort is not merely resurrected, he is chained. And Harry leaves the graveyard knowing that the Dark Lord's new life is already, quietly, part of his own design. The world tears sideways. Graveyard cold becomes stadium heat. The hiss of grave dirt and bone becomes the roar of thousands. Harry hits the maze floor hard, Cedric's body thudding beside him with a finality that feels louder than the crowd. The grave was empty behind his eyes, and yet here the corpse is, warm only by momentum, not by life. For a heartbeat, there is only the echo of the graveyard, the circle of masks, the gleam of wands, Voldemort's new, chained body rising from the cauldron fed with his blood. Then sound crashes in. Screams, applause that curdles as people understand what they are seeing. The cup, no, the portkey, rolls away like a discarded replica of triumph. This is important. Shock is a kind of magic. It stills a crowd, slows a room, turns even powerful witches and wizards into listeners. In that thin, suspended moment, Harry understands that whoever speaks first will shape the story, and whoever shapes the story will rule what the Ministry and Hogwarts believe happened in that grave. He could collapse. He could let the trauma take him, let Madame Pomfrey and Dumbledore and the Auras fill the silence with their own assumptions. But Slytherin has taught him that silence is just an invitation for someone else's truth. He chooses instead to stand. His hands shake, but his voice does not. He says the words that must be said, and only those. Voldemort is back. He used Harry's blood. Death Eaters answered the call and stood in a ring around a grave that held no rest. He names names where it is useful, lets others hang in the air like unanswered questions. He does not speak of the blood curse woven into the ritual, the hidden constraint that means Voldemort is, in a way, already tethered to him. He does not mention that he suspected the cup, that he had prepared for this night, that part of the plan was his. Not Dumbledore, who had watched him all year with that searching gaze, will hear about the careful provocations that flushed Barty Crouch Jr. into overconfidence. Not Hagrid, who had trusted him with dragons and secrets, will learn how Harry used the first task spectacle to test Ministry reaction times. Not Sirius, who had begged him to be careful, will be told how far from careful his godson has walked. Later in Dumbledore's office, the narrative shifts again. Behind stone and ward, Harry allows more truth to surface, but never all of it. He speaks of the wand duel, of the priori incantatum, of the way the Dark Lord's curse seemed to strain against something unseen. He hints, very precisely, at a ritual dependency on his blood. Enough to make Dumbledore move, to make him fear what a resurrected Voldemort might become if ignored. Not enough to reveal that Harry himself helped design the chain. With Snape, the conversation is colder. He describes Death Eaters returning, masks and marks bared, the way certain men flinched when Voldemort spoke of traitors. He offers fragments that can be cross-checked, verified, turned into leverage in the dark corridors where spies survive or vanish. Again, he conceals his own calculations, the ethical graves he has already dug in himself and chosen to leave unmarked. By dawn, the real battlefield is no longer a little Hangleton graveyard. It is the Great Hall, the Prophet's front page, the closed-door Wizengamot hearing where Fudge will decide whether the boy who lived is a warning or an inconvenience. Harry lies awake in the hospital wing, Cedric's empty bed a quiet accusation, and thinks in headlines, in testimonies, in which truths can survive cross-examination. He has brought one body back and buried a dozen other facts. The question is no longer whether they will believe Voldemort is alive. It is whose version of that resurrection will become law. And as footsteps approach the ward, hurried, official, already hungry for answers, Harry knows the next move in his plan will demand a sacrifice far stranger than blood. The footsteps that reach the hospital wing are not a rescue. They are an audience. Harry has arranged them that way. This is important. The grave of Alistair Moody's reputation is still unmarked when they drag the trunk into view, its 7 locks gleaming like a set of accusations. Harry watches, silent, as Dumbledore forces each compartment open, as the real Moody, gaunt, shaking, undeniably alive, is hauled from his wooden cell. But unlike the canon story, Harry is not bewildered prey. He has been waiting for this exact unveiling, every move calculated to keep the impostor breathing long enough to speak. He had known weeks ago. Not Dumbledore, who had dismissed Harry's unease as tournament nerves. Not Hagrid, who had cheerfully vouched for Mad-Eye between sips of something stronger than tea. Not Sirius, who had urged caution but lacked the vantage point inside Slytherin House. Harry had watched the patterns, the conveniently timed hints, the way the impostor's gaze lingered not on him but on his blood. A replica of concern wrapped around a colder intent. So he had steered the last task, had made himself just vulnerable enough in the maze that Crouch Jr. would not panic and kill him early, had ensured that when the portkey dragged him to the graveyard, he left behind a trail of witnesses and contingencies. The grave was empty in Little Hangleton when they arrived. Voldemort rose, as planned. But Harry returned with more than a scar and a story. He returned with a living conspirator. In Moody's office, when wands are trained on the bound Death Eater, Fudge demands a swift, quiet resolution. A kiss, an accident, an unfortunate confusion of apologies and paranoia. Harry cuts across him, voice low but unwavering, and insists on Veritaserum. Not in private, not as a sealed Aura report. A public, recorded interrogation with foreign headmasters present, with magical transcription charms woven into the stone itself. Anything less, he says, will be another grave for the truth. Lily was a charms prodigy, and though Harry does not know the full story of his mother's work, he understands the power of binding magic and witnessed testimony. He invokes ancient precedents, half-remembered from late nights in the Slytherin common room, and forces Dumbledore to choose between procedural comfort and moral necessity. Dumbledore hesitates. Fudge blusters. Harry does not yield. Under Veritaserum, Barty Crouch Jr. becomes a weapon. Names spill out, Death Eaters in masks at the resurrection, unmasked allies in the ministry who smoothed his path, the precise steps by which the tournament was twisted from within. He describes how security protocols were bypassed, how the goblet was deceived, how Hogwarts itself became a carefully prepared altar. The impact is immediate and corrosive. Beauxbatons and Durmstrang representatives are outraged, their students' near deaths revealed as collateral in a British power game. Parents write, then howl. The Daily Prophet, cornered by verifiable quotes and foreign pressure, prints, for a moment, a version of events that aligns with Harry's warnings rather than mocking them as hysteria. And through it all, Harry watches Cornelius Fudge, watches the minister's face tighten as each admission chips away at his authority, as the crowd's fear begins, imperceptibly, to look for someone to blame. Harry knows he has just made himself that man's enemy. But he has also lit a fire in public memory, one that will be far harder to extinguish than a boy's testimony in a quiet office. The war will not be fought in shadows alone now. It will be fought in headlines, in Wissengamot chambers, in the uneasy silence between parents and children on the platform. Harry has chosen that battlefield. The next move will demand something colder than courage, endurance. Hogwarts absorbed that choice like a wound. It did not scream. It did not bleed. It simply sat in the echoing quiet after the leaving feast, as the last golden plates vanished and the story of the graveyard began to seep from table to table like spilled ink. The grave was empty. This is the thing that nobody knew in full. Not the Wizengamot, not the Prophet, not Dumbledore, who had tried to cauterize panic with measured phrases and half-truths. But the students knew something else, something more immediate and far more corrosive. The tournament had never been safe, and one of their own professors had stood at the high table as a Death Eater in replica skin. Fear came first in the Great Hall, a thin, metallic taste on the air. Then anger. Then the brittle, stunned silence of betrayal. Gryffindors stared at the staff table with open hostility, their grief for Cedric Diggory sharpening into something almost vindictive. A boy had gone into the maze alive and come out a body, and the adults' grand plan had been to clap politely and award points. At the Hufflepuff table, the mood was worse for being quieter. They had sent their champion into a rigged game. They had cheered, painted banners, believed every reassurance that the magic protections were absolute. Now they sat with the knowledge that their house had been chosen as the acceptable loss, the expendable grave offered to fate so that history could happen somewhere else. This is important. That sense of being used would not fade. Ravenclaws did what they always did. They dissected. They replayed every inconsistency, Moody's sudden interest in Harry, the suspicious precision of the dragons, the way the third task maze had seemed almost designed to channel two boys toward a single cup. They began to map patterns, to ask in whispers who had known, who had lied, and why so many brilliant minds had missed what a fourth-year Slytherin had seen. And in Slytherin, the reaction was quieter still. Calculation instead of outrage, survival instead of mourning. They watched Harry with new, measuring eyes, recalibrating every assumption. A student had bent an ancient artifact, navigated 3 lethal tasks, and used the tournament itself as a charm to drag hidden enemies into the light. That was not luck. That was a plan. Harry's position in their house became a study in contradictions. Some saw only danger. Wherever he went, dark lords and curses followed. Proximity to him felt like standing on the edge of an unmarked grave. Others, especially those whose parents wore masks in secret, saw something colder. A boy who had identified Voldemort's agent before Dumbledore, who had turned the binding magic of the goblet into a leash on the Dark Lord's resurrection. Draco Malfoy moved first. Publicly, he did not embrace Harry, but he did something more telling. He stopped sneering. He stopped provoking. In the common room, his questions shifted from insult to inquiry, testing how far Harry would admit to planning, how precisely he had outmaneuvered Barty Crouch Jr. The truth was not spoken, but it was seen. Snape's treatment altered as well, in increments so small they were almost a new language. The open contempt dulled into a kind of severe, watchful respect. Detentions became rarer. Questions in class became sharper, as if he were probing the limits of Harry's understanding and perhaps his allegiance. Not Sirius, who had always imagined Harry as James Reborn, but Snape, who understood Slytherin instinctively, recognized what it meant to turn a school competition into a battlefield. Younger Slytherins watched Harry in the corridors, not with the old contempt, but with wary, almost reverent curiosity. Here was proof that their house's virtues were not mere words in a Sorting Hat song. Ambition and cunning had reshaped the war itself, and done so in full view of the school. Hogwarts had become another board now, its house rivalries threaded with a new unnerving truth. A Slytherin student had used the tournament to expose what adults had tried to smother. The castle's portraits whispered. The ghosts listened. Alliances shifted in the shadow of a boy who had turned survival into strategy. And the next term would not begin with Quidditch talk and book lists, but with a quieter question at every table. If Harry Potter could rig a tournament, what might he choose to rig next? The Ministry reacted as Hogwarts always had when something too large to name pressed against its walls. With denial, with procedure, with paper. Fudge stood before the press under magically brightened chandeliers and insisted that the tournament's sabotage, though regrettable, was an isolated deviation. A single madman, a tragic aberration. He could not, in this first volley, call Harry delusional. Crouch Jr. had stood in chains in the Great Hall, Veritaserum on his tongue, and spoken a story of graveyards and dark lords that resonated with an older terror the public already knew too well. This is important. The truth had been heard aloud in front of students and staff and portraits that repeated every word. So the strategy shifted. Publicly, the Ministry framed it as a closed incident, a completed investigation, a regrettable but contained failure of security. Privately, in the panelled conference rooms where scentless quills scratched across parchment, the second prong emerged. Harry and Dumbledore were to be rendered unreliable narrators of their own war. Not Dumbledore, who had once been untouchable, now carefully painted as eccentric, overextended, perhaps no longer fully in command of his judgment. Not Hagrid, who had never understood policy, who could be dismissed with a joke and a pat on the arm, but Harry, the boy who had turned a tournament into a controlled ritual. He became a file, a risk assessment, a problem to be managed. Memos circulated suggesting he had been overexposed to trauma, that his account of Voldemort's return might be coloured by suggestion or manipulation. Quietly, his Slytherin house affiliation was underlined in red ink, as if ambition itself were evidence. Harry read those currents as precisely as he had read the maze. He understood that this war, at least for now, would be fought with narrative, not curses. So he moved first. He sought out a particular journalist at the Daily Prophet whose byline had always carried a faint, frustrated edge. Someone who hated being lied to more than she feared losing access. He sent carefully worded letters to foreign correspondents who had watched the dragons and the lake from impartial stands. inviting them to verify details, to compare the ministry's line with what their own eyes had seen. Beyond parchment, he cultivated the ambitious underlings, the ones who stayed late in the Department of International Magical Cooperation, who dreamed of promotion and saw in Harry's version of events not only danger but opportunity. If Voldemort was alive under constraints Harry understood, then information itself became a kind of charm, a protective replica of power they could hold. This is important. He did not ask them to be brave. He asked them to be early. In the Wizengamot, where pure blood families wore their names like armor, the calculus shifted. The grave was empty in a different sense now. The old certainty that Voldemort's return would mean unchallenged dominion had been quietly buried. Here was a Dark Lord resurrected under observation, his ritual mapped, his wand arm measured against a boy who had already outplayed him once. Was that a risk to be welcomed, or a variable to be feared? Harry's controlled narrative, whispered over tea and under privacy charms, emphasized limits. Voldemort bound to Harry's blood. Voldemort dependent on specific conditions Harry had already survived. Some ancient families, who had once flirted with darkness, began to wonder whether backing a constrained monster was less profitable than backing the boy who had constrained him. And so the Second Wizarding War did not begin with a mass breakout or a burning village. It began with editorials whose final paragraphs did not quite match their headlines, with unsigned memos asking for contingency plans, with quiet questions from foreign ministries about British security protocols. In high-ceilinged offices, Harry's name was spoken with equal parts fear and speculation, his Slytherin cunning both accusation and asset. Somewhere between the ministry's denial and Harry's design, a new front opened. Not of bodies, of belief. And the next move would not be made in a graveyard, but in a single conversation where one powerful wizard would be forced to choose which story he was willing to live with. The next move began in silence. Dumbledore summoned Harry to his office as the castle slept, as portraits feigned slumber and the stone itself seemed to listen. This was not another performance for staff or students, not another grave speech about unity and courage. This was a reckoning between a headmaster who had always believed he held a script and a boy who had quietly started writing his own. Dumbledore had a plan. He always had. To reveal the prophecy in stages, to let the idea of destined sacrifice seep slowly into Harry's bones until martyrdom felt like choice rather than sentence. To guide Gryffindor bravery toward the altar with a gentle hand and a sorrowful smile. This is important. Because when Harry stepped out of that graveyard not as victim but as architect, Dumbledore understood something chilling. The boy had already made his own arrangements with fate, and he had not asked permission. So Dumbledore changed tactics. Short, deliberate, calculated, he offered more than he had ever intended to offer this early. The prophecy, not as rumor, but as recorded truth. The existence of the Order of the Phoenix, not as legend, but as living network. Voldemort's history, not as children's story, but as confession, threaded with the headmaster's own youthful proximity to darkness. He tried to fold Harry's independent strategies into his own larger design, to make the boy's Slytherin cunning another piece on his board rather than a rival board entirely. Harry listened. He always listened. But he had learned, in Slytherin corridors and under Snape's watchful scorn, that listening did not require surrender. He accepted some truths because they matched what he already knew. that his blood mattered, that Voldemort's magic had marked him, that war was coming whether he hid or not. He rejected others in the quiet of his own mind, especially the gentle inevitability with which Dumbledore spoke of death. And he withheld the most dangerous thing of all, the blood-cursed secret he had built into the resurrection ritual, the hidden condition that meant Voldemort now rose chained to Harry's terms. He understood something else as he watched the old man's eyes weigh every word. Dumbledore loved the greater good the way some men loved family, fiercely, completely, ruthlessly when required. Harry's desire was simpler, sharper, far less noble, to stay alive on his own terms and to choose which graves would be filled and which would remain, like his childhood understanding of his parents, a kind of empty replica. This is important. Dumbledore was used to Gryffindors who leapt. He was far less comfortable with Slytherin calculation that mirrored his own youth, the Grindelwaldera ambition he had buried but not forgotten. Not Dumbledore, who had once believed he could redesign the world if only he were allowed to arrange the sacrifices. Now he saw in Harry a quieter, colder version of that same instinct, turned not outward toward empire, but inward toward survival. Their conversation ended with polite words and unspoken conditions. Mentor and student, co-conspirators against Voldemort. And yet as they left that office, it felt less like guidance and more like chess. Two queens moved into the center of the board, each waiting to see who would blink when the next piece fell. The castle slept, the war did not, and both of them knew the next decision would not be made in an office or a graveyard, but in the moment one of them finally decided which future the other was allowed to have. The office door closed. The castle's stone silence gave way to another kind of quiet, the breathless, watchful stillness of number 12 Grimmauld Place, where the real war had already moved into the kitchen. The room was the same dark table scarred like an old battlefield, same dust in the corners, same whispered meetings that pretended Harry was not listening. But the boy at the table was different. He was not the fourth year who had stumbled into a graveyard. He was the Slytherin who had walked out of it with a plan. This is important. He did not rage this time when they sent him upstairs. He stayed in the doorway, back against the frame, and asked the questions no one wanted the boy who lived to ask. How many informants? What protections on their names? What happens if the ministry falls faster than Dumbledore expects? Not Dumbledore, who had always assumed time would bend itself around his strategies. Harry had seen what happened when an old man misjudged a grave and a prophecy and a boy. He would not let this house repeat the same charm of secrecy and half-truth. Moody watched him first. The ruined eye whirred, the real one narrowed, and the old aura's voice, when it came, was almost approving. Constant vigilance, Potter, you are finally speaking the right language. He showed Harry maps, safe houses, the thin line of names that were all that stood between this kitchen and open war. Grudging respect, edged with the knowledge that a weapon that thinks is harder to point. Lupin saw something else. The way Harry's questions never touched on glory, only on collateral. Who dies if this goes wrong? Which families are already marked? In another story, Lupin might have smiled at the boy's maturity. Here, he only felt the coldness creeping in around the edges of Harry's voice, the way grief had hardened into calculation. The grave was empty, but the cost of keeping him alive had not vanished. It had simply changed shape. Sirius was torn in two. He had expected James's son to be reckless, to joke, to throw himself at danger with a grin. Instead, he watched Harry dissect the Order's information security, point out how easily a single Imperious member could shatter them, insist on contingency plans for when, not if, Voldemort used Harry himself as bait again. Pride burned in him at the boy's acuity. Fear rose just as fast at how little of James's softness remained. The pattern interrupt came from Molly Weasley, as it always did. She slammed a plate on the table, voice shaking, declaring that Harry would not be dragged into war room discussions, that he was a child, that he needed protection, not briefings. Harry did not shout. He simply turned, scar-stark against the kitchen's weak light, and answered with a quiet that silenced even Moody. The war is already in me, in my blood, in my scar. Pretending otherwise nearly got you all killed in the tournament. The truth settled like dust. Not Hagrid, who had carried him from a ruined house, had understood what that meant. Not Sirius, who had dreamed of godfatherly mischief, had wanted to see it. Lily was a charms prodigy, but no charm could have kept Harry untouched by what he had done in that graveyard, by the way he had shaped Voldemort's return on his own terms. He pushed for more than inclusion, he demanded direction. Proactive strikes on suspected Death Eater finances, rotating codes for messages, clear lists of who was most at risk if the Ministry turned openly hostile. This was not a boy asking to be told the story. This was a strategist insisting on seeing the whole board. They argued, Molly about childhood, Lupin about the soul's erosion, Sirius about risk, Moody, surprisingly, about discipline. Yet, beneath the resistance, something inexorable shifted. They began to answer his questions instead of deflecting them. They let him see more maps. They listened when he pointed out that Voldemort would try to control the narrative of his own resurrection, and that the Order needed its own story prepared first. Reluctantly, they acknowledged what the graveyard had already written in blood. The boy at their table was not a symbol to be shielded. He was a weapon that had learned to aim itself. And ignoring where he pointed would be its own kind of fatal complacency. They had seen what he was becoming in the graveyard. Hogwarts would see it next. Umbridge arrived wrapped in pink and denial, a smiling Ministry replica of Order sent to occupy a school that was already a battlefield. She came prepared for a Gryffindor martyr, loud, impulsive, easy to provoke into noble speeches and detentions that proved her point. She did not come prepared for a Slytherin boy who had learned, in blood and ash, that the most efficient rebellions were the ones no one could quite name. This is important. Harry understood, perhaps more clearly than anyone else in that castle, that open defiance was a gift to a woman like Dolores Umbridge. So he did not give it. No shouted arguments in class, no dramatic storming from her office, no carved words on the back of his hand. Instead, he watched. He listened. He built a record. Detentions became data. He quietly collected copies of blood-quilled lines preserved with simple stasis charms that Lily was a charms prodigy would have admired for their elegance. He asked first years to write down exactly what she had said to them. The slurs, the threats, the way she spoke of half-bloods as if they were a regrettable administrative error. Ravenclaws brought him dates and times. Hufflepuffs brought him patterns. Even some Slytherins, stung by her contempt for children of Death Eaters, began to slip him murmured accounts in shadowed corridors. Dumbledore's army, in this timeline, was never just a dueling club in a hidden room. Under a Slytherin's hand, it became something colder, more deliberate, and far more dangerous to a regime built on control. The Room of Requirement hosted silent lessons in shield charms and silent alarms, yes, but also in coded messages, in how to vanish a parchment without a trace, in how to obey a rule in form while breaking it in spirit. Homework was completed and handed in on time, yet riddled with tiny, coordinated inaccuracies that made her approved curriculum unusable as actual defense. Not Dumbledore, who had once trusted the slow gravity of institutional change, could have organized such patient, distributed non-compliance. Harry was not waiting for the Ministry to come to its senses. He was building a file thick enough that when the moment came, the Ministry would not be able to pretend it had not known. His green and silver tie, however, complicated everything. Gryffindors remembered the boy who had outplayed the goblet and walked into the graveyard on his own terms. Some wondered if this, too, was only another plan whose full outline he would never share. Hufflepuffs questioned whether a Slytherin could be trusted with their most vulnerable stories. Even among his own house, whispers followed him. Was he undermining Umbridge or auditioning for her successor? Harry moved through those suspicions like someone navigating a field of buried curses. Every alliance required proof. Every meeting required witnesses from more than one house. The optics were as carefully managed as the magic. Umbridge felt the ground shifting long before she could name why. Her decrees multiplied, yet enforcement frayed. Rules were followed to the letter in ways that hollowed them out. Her inspections found tidy classrooms and respectful silence, and somehow a defense curriculum that would not stay fixed. A boy she watched relentlessly never quite broke a rule in front of her. The grave was empty again, in a different sense, the grave she was trying to dig for dissent. And somewhere behind the castle stone, Harry was already preparing the one move she had not imagined. What happens when the Ministry's own parchment turns against it? The parchment had turned. Now the visions did too. When the image of Sirius writhing beneath Voldemort's wand slammed into Harry's mind, it did not meet the knave, unarmored boy of another timeline. It struck a fifth year who had watched his own blood steam in a graveyard, who had felt how memory and fear could be used as a charm, as a blade. The grave was empty in his mind where blind trust used to lie. He did not run, he interrogated. Was the stone corridor real, or another crafted replica in his skull? Why did Voldemort show him this now, after months of half-glimpsed doors and the slow tightening of that obsidian corridor in his dreams? This is important. In this story, suspicion is his first instinct, not his last. He went to Snape, not as a sulking student forced into occlumency, but as a Slytherin who knew the value of shared interest. He laid out just enough of the vision to make the danger clear, and then, very quietly, asked how one separated planted images from truth. Not Dumbledore, who had vanished behind Ministry decrees and Phoenix fire. Not Hagrid, who had always believed in the simple honesty of giants and boys. Snape was the one who understood that minds were battlefields. The lessons changed. Less shouting, more structure. Snape drilled him on identifying seams in memories, on feeling for the foreign pulse of another will. Harry, who had once treated occlumency as punishment, now treated it as armor. Parallel to that, he used the Order's own channels against their secrecy. Under the pretext of concern, he asked Remus where Sirius had been stationed. Cross-checked with a quietly intercepted scrap of conversation from the Floo. listened for the telltale hesitation that would mean someone was lying about his godfather being safely at Grimmauld Place. And because he was Slytherin, he did not trust any single reassurance. He wove his own net. Members of Dumbledore's army drilled not only in spells but in silent signals, agreed on a simple plan: if Harry moved, they moved. A charm on a fake galleon would flare cold if he activated a silent alarm, the same magic that had once organized meetings, now repurposed as a clandestine summons. He still chose to go. The prophecy remained the one grave piece of truth he did not control, the Ministry's locked secret about why Voldemort wanted him alive. Waiting meant allowing the Dark Lord to choose the moment and the battlefield. A controlled incursion with a prepared team and layered escape routes was the lesser risk. This was important. He was no longer merely surviving Voldemort's plans, he was executing his own. In the Hall of Prophecy, the difference was immediate. They did not scatter like startled children. They moved in formations rehearsed in the Room of Requirement, shields interlocking, pairs assigned to watch ceilings and flanks, decoy spells already chosen. Hermione and Neville worked in tandem, shattering distant shelves to throw up curtains of falling glass, transfiguring fragments into whirling replicas of orbs that drew curses away from the real prophecy. Fred and George, brought in through that cold galleon and a whispered plan weeks earlier, layered the aisles with delayed jinxes and colorless tripping hexes that made masked figures stumble just long enough for the stunners to land. Ginny and Luna held a narrow choke point, their magic steady, their retreat path already mapped. The battle was still brutal, but it was not chaos. When the prophecy fell and broke, it did so because Harry chose a moment when its loss would buy them space to escape, not because his hand slipped in panic. Sirius still came, reckless, desperate, but the wards Harry had begged Kingsley to place on the atrium flues triggered faster, dragging reinforcements into the fray before Bellatrix's laughter could echo unchecked. Sirius's fate hung on a knife edge, no longer a foregone conclusion carved by Harry's impulsive charge. And when Voldemort finally appeared in the Ministry, wreathed in cold and fury, the world did not see a boy whose recklessness had lured disaster to London. They saw the inevitable confrontation Harry had been steering them toward since the tournament, the Dark Lord dragged into the light of his own choosing, at the time and place a Slytherin Harry had quietly prepared. The grave of secrecy at the Ministry cracked open, and the war at last stepped fully into daylight. The grave of secrecy had cracked, but sixth year began beneath a different kind of grave, a sky slowly filling with dark marks, a school wrapped in wards that felt less like protection and more like a besieged fortress. Harry walked back into Hogwarts not as a confused boy, but as the architect of a public war, and the castle felt smaller now, its corridors too narrow for the scale of his plan. This is important. The battered potions textbook still found its way into his hands. The margins still whispered with corrections and counter-curses, with cruelly elegant hexes and cleaner brewing methods. In another story, he might have seen only shortcuts and better marks. Here, Slytherin Harry recognized the handwriting at once. He knew the angles of those letters from detentions, from essays bled over in red ink. Severus Snape, on the page, was not a tormentor, he was a map. He began treating the Half-Blood Prince annotations as field notes from an enemy general. every improved stirring pattern, every amended ingredient ratio, every resort-precise jinx was catalogued in his mind as evidence how Snape thought, what risks he tolerated, where he concealed brilliance beneath mediocrity. The book was no longer a convenient charm of academic success, it was a replica of Snape's mind, bound in leather and spilled ink. When he used one of those spells, he did so to test a hypothesis, not to show off. How far would Snape go if cornered? How much violence lived in his restraint? Draco answered a different question. On the train, in the corridors, in the bathroom with blood on the tiles, Harry saw not a rival but a conscript. A boy with his wand hand shaking, shoulders bowed beneath a task he did not choose. Not Dumbledore, who had always spoken of second chances and the power of remorse, but Harry, who had rigged a tournament and a ministry revelation, understood what it meant to be forced into a role by a larger design. So he watched. He listened. He traced Draco's routes on a mental map of the castle, noted the vanishing cabinets, the whispered meetings. Draco Malfoy became not an irritant, but a frightened informant who did not yet know he was being debriefed. When Dumbledore began the Horcrux lessons, Harry was already steeped in darker theory. His research into blood curses, into protection that mimicked death without yielding to it, had left him unafraid of the vocabulary of soul magic. Lily was a charms prodigy, and somewhere in his bones he carried her instinct for structures and loopholes. He asked about vessel integrity, about whether cursed objects could be repurposed as bait, about what happened if a soul fragment resisted destruction. Dumbledore answered, but Harry heard the omissions more loudly than the words. The pattern interrupted him one night in the headmaster's office. A passing comment, a tightening around Dumbledore's eyes when Harry spoke of contingency. Suddenly the scattered hints aligned, the cursed hand, the insistence on Draco's redemption, the way Snape was being drawn into something unsaid. Harry knew. Dumbledore was arranging his own death as carefully as Harry had arranged the grave of secrecy at the Ministry. So Harry began to plan for absence. He quietly shifted the Dar from a student club to a proto-militia, assigning redundancies for leadership, communication, and intelligence. He nudged Order members toward shared command structures instead of blind deference. He studied Snape not only as a threat, but as a potential fulcrum if the man's double game collapsed. By the time lightning split the sky above the astronomy tower, Harry's grief had already been pre-translated into strategy. He stood beneath that darkening vault of stars, knowing that the war would not pause for mourning. A boy had come to Hogwarts. A general would leave it. Lightning cracked over the lake when Harry and Dumbledore vanished from the cave. The air still tasted of salt and poison and a thin iron of almost death. This is important. In canon, Harry walks out of that grotto as a shaken soldier following orders. Here, he steps onto the rock as a Slytherin who has begun to distrust any plan that requires his corpse. On the cliff, with Inferi still clawing at the memory of his ankles, he asks the question he has been sharpening all year. What happens if you do not make it back? Not Dumbledore, who had grown used to Gryffindor obedience, but a Harry who has studied contracts and curses and the grave logic of sacrificial magic, presses for specifics. Backup plans. Successors, the real scope of the Horcrux hunt. Dumbledore gives him more than he ever would have given the boy who simply nodded. Not everything. Never everything. But enough that when the locket proves a replica, Harry will understand that the story is larger than a single tower and a single fall. They return to a Hogwarts already under siege. green light in the corridors, the echo of shattering glass. Harry's first instinct is not to cling to Dumbledore's side like a shield, but to calculate. If the headmaster must die tonight, the death cannot be theatrically tragic. It must close a circuit, seal a vow, buy time. He moves through the chaos with that in mind, stunning where he must, but always with one eye on the larger board. Snape's absence, Draco's trajectory. The way the dark mark over the tower is not just a threat, but a summons. On the astronomy tower, hidden beneath the invisibility cloak and a layer of hard-won suspicion, Harry watches Draco disarm Dumbledore. He sees the boy's hand shake, he hears the crack in his voice. And in that stammering terror, he recognizes something uncomfortably familiar. The sensation of being drafted into someone else's prophecy. The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow, the graves of their childhoods are empty here, so he intervenes, but not with a shouted spell. His voice, low and disembodied, offers Draco what no one ever offered him. Information, protection, a way to live that is not simply choosing which master to disappoint. He speaks of unbreakable vows and of Snape's double game, of how Voldemort treats his servants as expendable components in a ritual rather than as people. He does not appeal to Draco's courage. He appeals to his fear of dying for a man who would not remember his name. Draco hesitates, longer than in canon, long enough that Dumbledore's eyes flick toward where Harry must be. Long enough that when Snape arrives, the room is thick with overlapping agendas, Dumbledore's planned surrender, Draco's faltering resolve, Harry's invisible negotiation. The killing curse, when it comes, is no longer a cleanly staged mercy. It is a forced move in a game that has spun one layer beyond the headmaster's script. Whether Harry is seen, whether a second spell flies, whether the tower becomes a graveyard or only a wound, remains uncertain. What is certain is this: when he walks back down those stairs, he is not a stunned witness stumbling after events. He is already mapping the whole Dumbledore's absence tiers in the world, already fitting Snape, Draco, the Dark Mark, and the False Locket into a new, colder plan. And waiting for him below is a revelation that will make even that plan feel small. He walks into the war with a map. Not a marauder's map, with its playful lines and moving names. A different kind of map, built from memories that are not his, from stories told in a cold office and in a dungeon classroom, from newspaper clippings and half-burned letters and to sharp, relentless questions of a boy who has decided that wandering will get him killed. This is important. Canon gave him tents and arguments and a radio playing names like a litany of the dead. Here, 6th year has already been the campaign's opening act. He has spent evenings not just following Dumbledore into bottled memories, but dissecting them afterward with Hermione, tracing Tom Riddle's footsteps across Britain the way a strategist traces troop movements on a battlefield. The grave in Little Hangleton, the cave on that desolate coast. Borgin and Burke's, Hepzibah Smith's sitting room. Every place Riddle ever looked at with hunger becomes a pin on parchment. Hermione thinks they are building an academic reconstruction of a monster's life. She does not know that Harry is quietly layering Snape's bitter asides, Slughorn's evasions, and Draco's scattered complaints about his family's vault into that same map. Not Dumbledore, who had guarded his secrets even as his hand blackened, has this composite picture. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from a different kind of wreckage, knew how far the boy is already thinking ahead. Slytherin connections turn abstraction into coordinates. a seventh year whose uncle once drank with a Lestrange, coaxed into boasting for the price of a favour. Draco, tight-lipped and pale, sliding over a copy of an old black family inventory because it is safer than saying aloud that some heirlooms feel wrong when you touch them. A clerk at Gringotts who is promised, not gold, but a written testimony someday that he tried to help. When the trials come, each reluctant confession becomes another line on the snake's map. The result is not a straight path. There are still ambushes, curses, and the corrosive presence of Horcruxes pressing against the edges of their minds. But there are fewer empty forests. Fewer days where the tent is their whole world and the grave of their hope. They strike the locket at a time when the Ministry's patrol routes leave a window. They go for the cup when the alley is crowded enough that Death Eaters will hesitate to unleash open slaughter. They choose nights, wards, apparition angles, always with one eye on minimizing the number of names the radio might someday read. The cost is trust. Ron and Hermione are not fools. They see the way Harry sometimes changes direction after reading a letter he does not share, the way he arrives at a location with the wary certainty of someone following instructions no one else can see. How many people are you bargaining with, Harry? Ron does not ask. What have you promised them? Hermione does. He answers with pieces of the truth, never the whole. That he is trading on Slytherin loyalties and fears. That he is promising mercy he is not sure he will be able to grant. That he has been planning since Blue Flames turned his name into a binding charm and he realized contracts can be weapons. He does not say that he has begun to think of himself as a commander whose friends are also assets, and that this thought terrifies him. So the seventh year is still a march through danger, still a hunt for fragments of a soul that cling to the world like stains that will not wash out. But the wandering is gone. In its place stands something colder, a young general moving down a list he wrote as a child when he first understood that the boy who lived was a role and a trap. The story is no longer of three teenagers lost in the woods. It is of a boy who arrives at each ruin and hiding place already knowing, with a grim and grave certainty, what he has come to destroy, and who has quietly arranged that Voldemort will have fewer places left to run when the final circle tightens. He has been closing doors. Graves, really, Horcrux by Horcrux, sanctuary by sanctuary, Harry has been walking through the dark with a Slytherin's patience, arranging that when Voldemort finally turns to face him, there will be nowhere left to flee and nothing left to hide behind. This is important, because the last weapons he aligns are not objects he can hold. They are systems of allegiance and blood and stolen life woven together years before he ever steps into the forest. The Elder Wand. The Horcruxes, the thin, poisonous chain of magic that has bound his heartbeat to Voldemort's since the night of the graveyard. Canon tells one story. A wand that changes loyalty when Draco disarms Dumbledore. A Dark Lord too arrogant to understand wand law. A boy whose victory is half accident. But in this story, the truth is colder. When Voldemort rose from the cauldron, when bone and flesh and blood knit themselves into a new body, the grave was empty of one thing he believed he had taken. He thought he had stolen Harry's protection. In fact, he had invited Harry's will into his veins. Lily was a charms prodigy, and Harry, raised in Slytherin's shadow, learns to read patterns the way she once read runes. Over the years, he maps the failures. Spells that should have killed him, but only scar. curses that rebound with a strange, hollow echo, moments in their mental link when Voldemort's rage stutters not from empathy, but from interference, like a charm miscast through the wrong wand core. Snape, pressed in a quiet, dangerous conversation, confirms what no textbook will admit. Experimental blood magic can create a contingent tether, power that flows as long as certain conditions are met, and that collapses catastrophically if those conditions are broken by choice rather than force. Not Dumbledore, who had spoken in riddles of love and sacrifice, ever explained it this way. Snape speaks of equations of will and consent, of chains that can only snap from inside. Slowly, Harry understands. The Elder Wand's allegiance is not merely a matter of who disarmed whom. It is a question of whose magic the wand is truly channeling. A wand chooses, but it also reads. It tastes the integrity of the power that flows through it. What happens when that power has been quietly sabotaged since the night of rebirth? The pattern interrupts him one winter evening. A vision, not of snakes or graves, but of the Hallows circling the same point as his scar and the cup in the graveyard. 3 systems, 1 axis. The Death Stick bound to mastery, the Horcruxes bound to fragmentation, the Blood Curse bound to mutual survival. If he times his final surrender correctly, all 3 can be collapsed in a single act. So he walks into the forest with more than acceptance. He walks with a plan. His death is not only a shield for others, it is the last condition of the curse. A willing surrender that offers Voldemort his life and, in the offering, rescinds consent. The chain binding their lives together snaps. The borrowed strength in Voldemort's blood gutters. When they face each other in the Great Hall, the room feels like a grave, waiting to decide whose name it will bear. Voldemort believes he holds the Elder Wand, believes he has stripped his enemy of every advantage but sentiment. He does not see that the wand is reading him as hollow, that the magic in his body has been compromised since the cauldron, that every curse he casts is passing through a damaged, fraying conduit. The final killing curse is not a clash between equal powers and rival wands. It is the moment a Dark Lord discovers that the foundation of his resurrection was a replica of strength, a counterfeit built on stolen blood that no longer consents to sustain him. And the boy before him is not merely master of the Elder Wand. He is the living fulcrum of every broken chain. The castle does not stumble into war this time. It walks toward it with its eyes open. It has been walking since a 14-year-old Slytherin stood in a graveyard and understood that the Dark Lord's return would not be stopped, only shaped. This is important. The Battle of Hogwarts is not a frantic improvisation, not a desperate scramble of children and teachers against an overwhelming tide. It is the execution of a plan that has been whispered in unused classrooms, mapped in hidden passages, and layered into the very stones by a boy who learned very early that survival is a long game. Harry has been seeding contingencies for years. Not Dumbledore, who had once believed in prophecy more than preparation. Harry walks with McGonagall along the battlements in his 5th year, asking polite questions about structural charms and shield lattices, filing away every answer. He corners Kingsley after an order meeting, speaking quietly of evacuation routes that do not rely on the main gates, of flu networks that can be deadened on command. He spends evenings with the Marauder's map not for mischief, but to identify choke points where corridors narrow and staircases can be persuaded to freeze. He does something else as well. He talks to Slytherins. The story of Slytherin House in this war is different because the grave was empty in Harry's understanding of loyalty. Allegiance is a currency, not a destiny. So he lets them see things. The way Voldemort's magic faltered in the graveyard. The way the dark mark burned not with glory, but with compulsion. The way the Dark Lord, for all his terror, was bound by rules he did not fully control. Some families listen, some students watch. And when the night finally comes, the mass desertion never quite materializes. There are those who declare neutrality and vanish into the passage to Hogsmeade that Harry left conspicuously unguarded. There are others who stay, not in the Great Hall, but in the shadows, feeding information, misdirecting Death Eaters, opening the right door at the wrong moment. Voldemort's expected support base fractures into hesitance and quiet sabotage. Harry himself is not everywhere. He refuses to be. His focus is narrow, almost ruthless. Protect the Horcrux hunters as they move through the castle's underbelly. Maintain morale where it is thinnest, appearing in the thick of a fight long enough to turn panic into grim resolve, then vanishing before hero worship can make him a single point of failure. And above all, draw Voldemort step by step into a confrontation on ground that has already been calculated. Allies answer his earlier invitations. The merpeople rise from the Black Lake on a signal charm Lily would have admired. Tridents and spears break the surface as they drag in fairy and masked figures down into the dark. The centaurs do not arrive as a belated cavalry. They emerge on cue, their volleys of enchanted arrows coordinated with protective domes the Dar has rehearsed and a cover of defense study groups since 5th year. Children move like an army that has trained in secret, using staircases as traps, classrooms as kill boxes, and the room of requirement as a living armory. By the time Voldemort steps into the Great Hall, he does not find a cornered school clinging to life. He finds a fortress that has been quietly aligning every stone, every wand, every frightened heartbeat toward this single night since a Slytherin first decided to rig a school tournament. He believes he is entering to claim a victory. He does not yet understand that he is walking into the last and most carefully prepared task, and Harry is already waiting, with one final condition he has not revealed to anyone. He wins. Of course he wins. But the victory that night in the graveyard is not a clean severing of darkness, it is a careful redirection of it, a binding of horror into something narrower, colder, more deliberate. This is important. Because when historians later count the bodies from this second war, they will notice something uncanny. There are fewer massacres, fewer villages wiped from the map, fewer great halls painted in blood. The blood curse Harry forces into Voldemort's resurrected body. The public exposure of his return before the Ministry can deny it. The way he maneuvers the Wizengamot to harden its wards rather than its rhetoric, these things work. The world does not burn as widely, but it does bruise more deeply. Instead of open slaughter, there are quieter atrocities, obliviated witnesses, assassinated witnesses, children turned informants against their own parents. There are students in Slytherin and Hufflepuff alike who will wake in middle age and realize that half their adolescence was spent as pieces in Harry Potter's plan, not in Voldemort's. The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow in another story. Here it is trust that is buried with no marker, no charm to call it back. He saves lives. That is not in dispute. The early shattering of the Ministry's denial means no Azkaban breakout on the same catastrophic scale. No unchecked rampage of giants across the countryside. No Hogwarts battle that turns the castle into a replica of a besieged fortress from legend. Many who died in another timeline remain alive in this one. Nameless Muggle-borns, shopkeepers. Even a few Aurors who never have to stand a last watch at the gates. Yet every life preserved has a ledger line beside it, written in smaller, sharper ink. The lie told to Hermione about why he entered the tournament. The calculated leak that put Cedric in the maze at precisely the wrong or right moment. The way he nudges Fleur and Kroom into patterns of risk they did not consent to, steering them toward tasks and traps that further his unseen design. Not Dumbledore, who had once moved children like chessmen, but Harry, who learned the lesson too well and refined it. History will fracture around him. Some will speak of a savior who outplayed both Dark Lord and Ministry, who used Slytherin cunning as a shield rather than a dagger. Others will murmur a quieter story of a boy who learned to think like his enemies and never fully came back, whose magic always felt a little too precise, whose eyes always seemed to be measuring exits. In private, his own accounting is harsher. He remembers every flinch in Hermione's expression when truth finally surfaces, every moment Cedric trusted him. Every night, Fleur and Kroom walked into danger, believing the tournament was merely dangerous, not architected. He knew. They did not. That asymmetry becomes its own kind of curse. So, was the world truly saved, or merely rearranged into a more controlled and intimate horror? The war's toll cannot answer that. The numbers are kinder, the scars are not. And as the dust settles, the question that remains is not whether Harry won, but what, exactly, he allowed himself to become in order to do so. He was not the first wizard to play a long game with a boy's life. He was only the first boy to notice. Dumbledore's design had been almost elegant in its cruelty. A prophecy heard in a shadowed room, then buried. A childhood arranged at arm's length from magic so that wonder would bind Harry to the world Dumbledore needed him to die for. A school year pattern of escalating trials, each a controlled burn of danger, the stone, the chamber, the Dementors, always terrible, always survivable, so that courage could be trained like a muscle for one specific night in a graveyard. This is important. The final movement of that plan was simple. Harry walks knowingly to his death, love turns Avada Kedavra into a broken replica of itself, and Voldemort's fear of that love unravels him. Dumbledore meant for the boy to learn the prophecy late, to accept mortality early, and to meet the Dark Lord at the end as a sacrificial lamb who understood why the knife must fall. But Slytherin Harry did not wait to be told why. He began with the assumption that no one who held that much truth would give it freely. Not Dumbledore, who had already decided what kind of symbol Harry should be. Not Hagrid, who had carried him from the ruins but never spoken of the arguments that preceded that night. Not Sirius, who had vanished into Azkaban without ever explaining why. Harry's response to this silence was not Gryffindor trust. It was Slytherin agency, where Dumbledore's plan prized controlled revelation, Harry's prized premature knowledge. He read in the restricted section under borrowed passwords, traded favors with Snape for fragments of Voldemort's past, mapped the politics of the Board of Governors and the Daily Prophet with the same cold precision he brought to the second task. He did not merely survive the Triwizard Tournament, he rewrote its meaning. The dragon became a staged spectacle of competence to embarrass Ministry regulators. The Black Lake became a demonstration that he could bend merfolk treaties and Slytherin loyalties alike. The maze became a funnel, a deliberate narrowing of possibility so that when he reached the grave, it would not be by accident. The grave was empty of surprise. He had ensured that. His blood was given, but on terms he had negotiated in advance with his own terror. Both wizards concealed, both manipulated, both told partial stories in the name of protection. Yet where Dumbledore wrapped his omissions in paternal warmth and lemon drops, Harry wrapped his in the austere logic of survival learned in a house that spoke openly of lineage, power, and the cost of naivety. Dumbledore trusted that love, revealed at the end, would redeem the prior lies. Harry trusted that structural change would make such lies unnecessary ever again. So how will history speak of them? Dumbledore, the benevolent strategist whose withheld truths left a generation one misstep from annihilation. Harry, the necessary monster who exposed the Ministry, shattered Hogwarts' complacency, and weaponized narrative so thoroughly that no child would enter a war unbriefed. Years later, in a quiet corridor, two portraits hang. Dumbledore in his half-moon serenity, Harry older, eyes like green glass burned by too much knowledge. New students pass beneath their gaze. The frames listen to the murmured rumors, the new fears, and wonder, each in his own silence, which of their sins the next generation will choose to repeat. This is important. Slytherin House felt the watching first. The eyes, the whispers. The knowledge that the same green and silver banners had sheltered the boy who quietly rewrote a tournament into a war ritual, and the boy who walked out of a graveyard with Voldemort screaming behind him. The grave was empty, but the house table might as well have been an altar. Parents wrote letters. Governors convened special sessions. Some wanted Slytherin dissolved, its students scattered like dangerous relics to the remaining houses. Others argued that if Hogwarts could survive Voldemort as an alumnus, it could survive Harry Potter as a Slytherin, who had turned the Dark Lord's own binding magic into a trap. This is important. The conversation was no longer about childish rivalries. It was about whether an institution could be trusted when it had produced both the worst of their nightmares and the architect of their survival. Inside the house, the debates were sharper, more intimate, and far less polite. Older students remembered the way Harry had moved through the common room. Quiet, observant, always 3 steps ahead. Always with a plan. They knew he had nudged alliances into place before the first task, that he had treated the goblet not as a relic, but as a loophole waiting to be opened. Some said he had proved that ambition and cunning were not stains on the soul, but tools, and that Slytherin magic, properly directed, could corner even a resurrected Dark Lord. Others did not forgive so easily. They spoke of the year the lake felt like a grave, of watching classmates vanish into mazes and dragonfire while the headmaster and the Ministry applauded. They resented that Harry's strategy had painted a target on their crest, that every future Slytherin would walk into a world that saw serpents and thought of rigged cups and controlled killings. Institutional reforms followed, not from Dumbledore, who had misread the boy under his nose, but from a coalition of governors who were tired of learning the truth only after the blood had dried. A new head of house took the post, one who taught strategy as a discipline and ethics as a constant countercharm, insisting that every plan be tested not only for effectiveness but for cost. Slytherins were given formal seats on student councils, channels to argue openly for resource allocation, security protocols, even curriculum, so that influence no longer had to live entirely in the shadows. The younger students grew up with a different story. To them, Harry was not a traitor to Slytherin, but its most extreme expression. The proof of what happened when their virtues were taken to their logical, merciless conclusion. First years whispered about the boy who had walked into a binding ritual knowing exactly what his blood would buy, who had turned a tournament into a controlled detonation of an entire war. Some repeated his name like a prayer, others like a warning. Outside the dungeons, the public image shifted in ways that made no one comfortable. Slytherin was no longer simply the house of monsters in bedtime tales. It was the house that had given them Voldemort and the boy who learned to beat him at his own game. The grave of evil house versus good house lay open and disturbed, its simple narrative exposed as a replica, a convenient charm against complexity. And in that uneasy space, as new serpents chose their beds beneath the lake, one question coiled tighter with every year. What would happen when the next Slytherin genius decided that Harry's legacy was not a warning at all, but a blueprint? The blueprint had been written in green and silver, but blue and red had lived beside it, breathing, arguing, trusting. This is important. Hermione Granger was the first to map the pattern, long before she admitted it aloud. The missing explanations, the half-truths around the goblet, the way Harry's eyes would shutter when she asked precisely how he had known where the portkey would land, or why his wand had already been primed with counter-curses tailored to Voldemort's graveyard magic. She admired it. Of course she did. The elegance of the plan. The way he had turned a binding charm and a cursed tournament into a controlled experiment in power. But admiration sat on top of something rawer. The knowledge that he had chosen to walk that graveyard alone, while she, who lived for analysis and moral calculus, had been left outside the room. For Hermione, the betrayal was not that he lied. It was that he decided the story of their friendship could continue without her informed consent. Not Dumbledore, who had hidden prophecies and hallows. Not Hagrid, who had brought secrets wrapped in cakes. This was Harry, the boy whose homework she corrected, whose temper she soothed, whose life she had once saved with a single shouted spell. She knew she could have strengthened the plan, could have spotted variables he had missed. Instead, she had been treated like a fragile replica of herself, all intellect and no right to risk. Ron Weasley felt it differently, but no less sharply. Pride came first, loud and blazing. His best mate, the one the world called reckless, revealed as the mastermind who had outplayed Death Eaters, ministry officials, and a resurrecting Dark Lord. But pride curdled when he replayed the tournament and saw with sick clarity every moment he had stood on the wrong square because he had not been allowed to see the board. The second task. The lake. Ron bound beneath the water as a hostage, not a partner. A loyal piece, not a planner. In the quiet after the war, the arguments came. Not in the Great Hall, but in cramped kitchens and dim sitting rooms, long after midnight when the victory toasts had gone flat. Harry tried to explain that their innocence had been a resource, a kind of protection no charm could replicate. That if Voldemort believed Ron and Hermione ignorant, their reactions would be pure, unpredictable, impossible to counterfeit under Veritaserum or Legilimency. The grave was empty, he said, because he had buried their childhood there to keep them alive. They listened. Then they answered. Hermione, voice shaking but precise, asked what worth survival had if it was purchased by the erosion of trust. Ron demanded why Harry had decided, alone, that they were too breakable for the truth but sturdy enough to bleed beside him in battle. Wasn't real loyalty choosing danger with your eyes open? Their bond did not shatter. It hardened. It acquired boundaries like scar tissue. There were new rules, spoken and unspoken, no more unilateral plans that gambled with other people's souls, no more noble lies justified by imagined fragility. Love remained, but it no longer pretended that love erased damage. Years later, they would sit together in a quiet wizarding pub off Diagon Alley, the air thick with old wood and older magic. They would laugh sometimes about school days, about exploding cauldrons, about a flying car, about a Slytherin common room that had once housed a Gryffindor heart. But when someone at the next table mentioned the Triwizard Tournament, the shadow would pass over all three faces at once. They would share a glance that held graveyards and goblets and the cost of being kept in the dark. And in that silence, another question would begin to form, one that pointed beyond their trio toward a wider world still living in the wake of a Slytherin Harry's design. The question that began in that silence was simple and devastating. What happens to a Dark Lord when the world learns he is not a storm, but a failed strategist on someone else's board? In canon, Voldemort is a shadow first and a man second. The grave of his first reign is filled with whispers. He is everywhere. He is unstoppable. He is the inevitable conclusion of magic unrestrained. Fear did not need facts. It fed on absence, on the sense that no plan could anticipate him. This is important, because in this timeline, the grave was empty of that illusion from the moment Harry stepped into the maze with his own plan already coiled around the goblet's binding charm. Here, Voldemort returns not as a legend erupting from myth, but as a compromised experiment exposed in real time. His body rises in a graveyard, yes, but the ritual is observed, dissected, anticipated by the very boy whose blood is meant to chain him to life. Harry has already mapped the circle, already tested the limits of the blood curse that threads between them. The Dark Lord's wand lifts, and somewhere in the maze of Hogwarts politics, parchments and replicas of ministry reports are waiting, ready to be released the moment green light touches sky. The Death Eaters feel the difference first. They came for a god and found a man whose magic stutters when turned against his chosen victim, whose killing curse slides off Harry's protections with a wrongness none of them were warned about. Some feel betrayed, not by defeat, but by omission. Their master knew his soul was fractured, knew the boy's blood might carry a counter-curse he did not fully understand, and told them nothing. Others cling to the comfort of coincidence. The portkey misfired. The ministry interfered. Dumbledore meddled. Anything, so long as they do not have to admit that the structure itself was flawed, that the plan was always breakable. Future dark wizards study the record and see something colder. They do not see an aspirational figure. They see a cautionary tale about underestimating the agency of one's sacrifice, about treating a marked child as an object in a prophecy rather than a strategist with his own designs. They see how quickly public narrative hardens when given documents, testimonies, dual transcripts. The story is no longer, he returned from death. It is, he returned under conditions chosen by his enemy. Not Dumbledore, who had once believed in keeping truths buried, but Harry, who drags the resurrection into the light at the tournament and again at the ministry, ensures that Voldemort is catalogued, footnoted, debated. Not Hagrid, who had carried a baby from ruins, but a Slytherin teenager who walks back from a graveyard with a controlled account and witnesses prepared. Not Sirius, who had rotted for a crime he did not commit, but a boy who refuses to let this crime vanish into rumor. The name Voldemort still curdles the air in this world. Yet always, beneath the fear, there is the whispered addendum he was beaten not by chance, but by a boy who refused to play by the rules written for him. And somewhere, another would-be tyrant reads that line and hesitates, wondering what plans are already being written against him. But there is another version of this story. A quieter one. A smaller one. A world in which blue flames never turned, the goblet was never corrupted, and Harry Potter remained exactly what the rules said he should be: a spectator. In that world, the grave of his childhood would still be crowded with names and dates and carved promises, but the tournament itself would not become another grave dug for his innocence. He would sit in the stands as a fourth-year Slytherin, robes buttoned against the November wind, watching older students descend into dragons and lakes and hedges without feeling the iron weight of a binding charm on his own magic. This is important because it means that when Victor Krum dives, when Fleur Delacour vanishes beneath the water, when Cedric Diggory smiles that careful Hufflepuffle-nest smile, Harry is only a boy in the crowd. He still would have been ambitious, still wary, still learning how to move through Slytherin politics under Snape's narrowed gaze and Draco's brittle pride. But there would be no secret plan, no stolen knowledge of how easily the goblet can be deceived, no understanding that public spectacles are the perfect place to hide private crimes. He would go back to the common room and argue about points and predictions, not about how to survive a maze designed to kill. Without the graveyard, his magic develops more slowly, less scarred. There is no hiss of ropes binding him to a tombstone, no circle of masked replicas of men who once sat in the Hogwarts Great Hall. There is no moment when he watches his own blood smoke in a cauldron and understands that his body has become a key. Years later, when Voldemort does rise by some other, rougher method, Harry meets him not as a strategist who has rehearsed death, but as a young wizard whose duels have mostly been on school corridors. Friendships, too, remain simpler. Ron is only a friend, not a boy who watched Harry's name burst from cursed fire. Hermione is only a classmate and conscience, not the mind he leans on while the world calls him liar or champion. Even Draco's rivalry is smaller, more schoolyard than battlefield. Harry is not yet the quiet architect of war, measuring which truth to speak and which lie to let stand, and yet the darkness waits. Not Dumbledore, who had always believed that some knowledge must be delayed. Not Hagrid, who had always trusted that love and loyalty would be enough. Not Sirius, who had always wanted Harry to have a normal life, could truly keep the war away. The Ministry would still deny. The Prophet would still distort. The grave in Little Hangleton would still be there, patient, even if the ritual that fills it with power comes later. So the tournament's unfairness becomes a paradox. It both breaks and preserves him. It forges a weapon where a child should have stood, teaching him that contracts can be twisted and that public opinion is another battlefield. But it also gives him, in this darker world, the tools to see through replicas of safety and comfort, to recognize that the story adults tell him is never the whole truth. And we are left with the cruel, unanswerable question: which Harry had the better chance of surviving with his soul intact, the boy in the stands, or the boy who learned too early how to rig the fire that chose him? Because once he learns how to rig the fire, he learns something far more unsettling, that survival in this world is less about innocence and more about authorship. About who gets to write the story of what happened in the graveyard and whose version becomes the truth. This is important. Canon Harry is dragged from one revelation to the next, always arriving late to his own life. Slytherin Harry, who has spent 4 years watching staff meetings from the shadows of the dungeons and listening to snakes in the walls, refuses that role. He will not be the boy on the chessboard. He will be the player. Even if that means becoming as meticulous, as cold in his calculations, as the adults who once treated him like a symbol instead of a child. So he studies the goblet like a cursebreaker studies an ancient ward, testing boundaries with harmless names, replica parchments, and controlled misfires. He maps the Ministry's hunger for spectacle, Dumbledore's need for prophecy, Voldemort's need for his blood. The plan that emerges is not an accident of bravery, it is a deliberate charm work of control. And in claiming that control, he steps into the same moral weather that shaped Dumbledore's own youth. Because everywhere around him, the grown-ups are already lying in the name of protection. Not Dumbledore, who had buried prophecies and half-truths under the floorboards of Harry's childhood. Not Hagrid, who had turned the night of the hut on the rock into a rough, comforting story instead of a kidnapping from a war zone. Not Sirius, who had let the boy believe Azkaban was the whole truth of his failure. The Ministry prints posters, stages trials, rewrites the graveyard of the First War into a tale of decisive victory. Every lie comes with the same justification: it was safer this way. Harry learns the lesson. He lies to his friends about how much he knew, about why he pushes them away before each task. He lies to his enemies by playing the frightened child while feeding Crouch Jr. Just enough false security to keep the man in place. He lies to himself about how necessary it all is. If he chooses to be the weapon, if he walks into the ritual on his own terms, does that redeem the harm that follows? Or does agency only make the wound sharper? Because now he knew exactly what he was doing. There is a terrible allure to this version of Harry. Competent, prepared, a boy who treats magic like strategy, who can turn a dragon into a staged political performance and a lake into a controlled rescue operation. Yet the grave of his childhood is empty. In its place stands a general who is not yet old enough to vote in the Wizengamot, calculating acceptable losses with ink-stained fingers. The story does not answer whether he is right. It holds up a mirror. If the goblet spat out your name, would you cling to innocence, or would you, too, start reaching for the strings behind the fire? And in this AU, someone else is already reaching back. Someone is already reaching back, and now, at the edge of the maze, the question turns toward you. In this story, the first divergence was a single decision in a candlelit hall, the sorting hat sliding over messy black hair and whispering Slytherin. Not a frightened boy swept along by Gryffindor applause, but a child seated among serpents, learning that survival is an art and that power, properly directed, can be a kind of shield. This is important, because from that moment, every step toward the Triwizard Tournament bent in a different direction. He does not stumble into the goblet's trap, he rigs it. He studies the magic, the binding charm, the gaps in Dumbledore's protections. and he walks forward knowing that his name will blaze blue-white from the fire. The grave was empty. In place of the helpless champion stands an architect who has chosen the field of battle, engineered a controlled resurrection, and forced a war to begin on terms he wrote himself. Not Dumbledore, who had always preferred prophecy and patience. Not Hagrid, who had trusted courage to be enough. Not Sirius, who had dreamed of flight and escape. Harry chooses the maze. Along the way, the crossroads darken. He misleads other champions, letting Fleur and Kroom walk into dangers he has already mapped, hoarding information the way others hoard relics. He learns to manipulate public fear, allowing the Daily Prophet to paint him as unstable when it suits his plan, then as savior when he needs the crowd to roar. He weaponizes his own blood, turning the very ritual meant to bind him into Voldemort's rebirth into a tether he can pull. Which of these do you find most justifiable? Which feels to you like the unforgivable line where strategy becomes something colder than heroism? Because beneath the spells and the smoke, this is a story about alignment. Some will feel the pull of Gryffindor Harry, the boy who reacts, who throws himself between the curse and the victim, who accepts the grave as the cost of doing what is right. Others will recognize themselves in Slytherin Harry, who refuses to wait for disaster, who would rather stain his hands in advance than watch another Cedric fall because he hesitated. When you imagine an existential threat pressing against your own life, your own family, which instinct rises first, reactive bravery or preemptive cunning? So step back into Goblet of Fire for a moment and choose a single scene to rewrite in this darker ink. Is it the Dragon Arena, with Harry turning the Horntail into a staged catastrophe to discredit the Ministry, the Black Lake, where he bargains with merfolk and tests how far they will bend for leverage? The maze, already a crucible, reimagined as a ritual diagram he prepared weeks in advance? Or the graveyard itself, where the replica of the helpless boy is bound to the tombstone while the real Harry stands in the shadows, wand already raised? Tell us which moment you would change and why. The comment section tonight is not an afterthought. It is an extension of the magic, another chamber beneath the maze where this plan can twist, refine, and grow. Lily was a charms prodigy, but here all of you share that role, layering new wards, new choices, new prices onto the path we have walked. The story is not finished when the credits fade, it is merely handed to you, still warm, still alive, waiting to see what you will dare to do with it. And so the maze does not close, it widens, its hedges parting to reveal not one path, two. On one side, the boy in scarlet and gold, who trusts the map that others hand him and runs toward the roar. On the other, the boy in green and silver, who studies the shadows behind the roar and asks who placed the monster there in the first place. This is important, because now the story is no longer only about what Slytherin Harry did. It is about which Harry you would have been. In the comments, choose your house, choose your Harry, Gryffindor Harry, who trusts and reacts, or Slytherin Harry, who suspects and preempts. Do not only name him, defend him. Explain why you would stand beside the boy who dives into the lake to save strangers, or the boy who looks at the goblet's blue flames and begins, at once, to reach for the levers behind it. As you choose, linger on a single moment, the one that caught in your throat. The scene where this Slytherin Harry felt most terrible, most magnificent, where his magic and his fear and his anger braided into something you were not sure you could still call innocence. Was it when he turned the first task into a controlled spectacle, using a dragon not as an obstacle but as a stage? When he treated the second task as a negotiation instead of a rescue? When he walked into the graveyard already knowing whose grave was empty, already knowing the ritual would not go as Voldemort planned? Right that moment, name the line he crossed that you would not. Or admit quietly that you would have crossed it sooner. The grave was empty. The conscience might be too. And then look forward. The Triwizard Tournament is only one battlefield. There are other knights, other wars, other alliances that might have broken differently under this same dark cinematic light. Which would you see remade first? A ministry coup where Harry stands beside Fudge instead of against him. A Department of Mysteries where he bargains with Death Eaters instead of fighting them. A final battle where it is not Dumbledore who had orchestrated the board, but Harry who chooses which pieces survive the night. Your choices matter here more than you think. Likes, shares, subscriptions, these are not decorations, they are magic of a different sort. The binding charm that decides which replica of the future becomes real. Every time you press 1, you are dropping your name into a new goblet, helping select which alternate war, which broken alliance, which unbearable sacrifice will be called next. So, before you leave the maze, carry one last question with you. If the hat had whispered Slytherin, and you had stood before the goblet's blue flames, knowing the adults were hiding things from you, would you have trusted them or quietly reached for the strings yourself? Whichever answer you gave, the maze does not end here. One altered choice in a flickering great hall, one Slytherin sorting and a rigged goblet, points toward other corridors where the torches burn a different color and the cost of survival rearranges itself. Because if Harry could learn to pull strings, someone had to teach him what strings were. Imagine a world where Severus Snape did not merely sneer from a distance, but took the infant he had begged Lily to protect and hid him before the curse ever flew. Not Dumbledore, who had charts and prophecies and a long game measured in graves. Snape, with a single desperate promise and a talent for secrets, raising Harry in the shadows as an asset, a penitent offering. A boy who knew from childhood that the safest place was under a spy's cloak. This is important. A Harry who grows up in Snape's one-bedroom flat above Spinner's End learns that every kindness is also a calculation, that every charm is also a weapon. The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow because no one ever went there. The shrine is instead a locked drawer of letters Lily never sent. Lily was a charms prodigy, but in this version her legacy reaches Harry through Snape's bitter, careful lessons, not through Hagrid's trembling arms. What does the Triwizard Tournament look like when its champion has been trained from infancy to think like a double agent? Or shift the camera a few inches along the Slytherin table. Draco Malfoy, 3rd year, a hippogriff's talons inches from his throat. In canon, he falls backward into his father's prejudices. Here, imagine he falls forward instead, into doubt. He sees the way Lucius uses him as a pawn, sees the quiet terror in Narcissa's eyes, and when the Dementors circle the Quidditch pitch, he realizes which side would actually leave his body on the grass. What if Draco switched sides then, not as a last-minute redemption, but as a long, slow treason that begins with a whispered apology in a dark corridor and ends with him standing beside Harry in the maze, wand steady, name and future both on the line? And beyond Hogwarts, the Ministry. Fudge's hat askew, the dark mark rising over the graveyard, the truth impossible to deny. What if, after the tournament, they believed Harry at once? No smear campaign, no year of poisonous doubt, open war, immediately auras in the corridors, Dementors reassigned. Hogwarts no longer a school with a danger problem, but a fortress with a curriculum. How different is a Slytherin Harry when the adults admit the sky is falling instead of insisting on blue. In the comments, in the poll, you choose which divergence we descend into next. Snape's secret ward, Draco's third year betrayal, or a ministry that goes to war the moment the cup spits Harry back out bleeding. Your vote is another name into a new goblet, another binding contract for where this story will turn. This is important too. Whatever path you choose, the tone will not soften. We will not simply shuffle plot points like cards. We will ask what these people owe each other, what their magic does to their morals, how politics and prophecy grind against the fragile, ordinary wish to be left alive and unbroken. We will stay with the long silences after the duels, with the letters never sent, with the replica smiles worn at victory feasts where everyone can taste ash. If you are drawn to that slower, darker kind of storytelling, the kind that lingers in the stairwells and listens at the keyholes, turn on notifications. Let the next alternate Hogwarts find you when the castle is quiet and the portraits are half asleep. Each episode will be another descent, another corridor where the familiar portraits have different names and the house point's hourglasses measure out entirely new sins. Because tonight we asked what happens when the boy who lived decides to be the boy who plots. Next time we will ask something colder. If it is not Harry who pulls the strings, if it is Snape or Draco, or the minister himself who chooses to rig the game, who pays the price when someone else does. So we return at the end to the Black Lake. The stands are distant now. The banners are gone. The cheering has burned itself out and drifted away like smoke. What remains is quieter, and older, cold water, black as ink, and the echo of a single shattering scream from a golden egg that once told a boy to dive. Beneath that surface, 4 hostages slept in the grip of ancient magic. They were not replicas, not illusions, but breathing anchors to a set of rules older than any of them. Above, a boy treaded water and did arithmetic with lives. 1 hostage, 2, 3, 4. How many could he risk to prove that mercy mattered more than the letter of the task? How many could he leave behind to prove he understood the game? This is important. Because in this world, Slytherin Harry did not simply fight the lake. He read it. He measured the distance between the merpeople's spears and the judge's gaze, between the binding contract of the tournament and the unspoken contract of public opinion. He knew that every second he spent cutting ropes and hauling bodies upward was also a calculation. How far could he bend the rules before they broke, and who would drown if they did? That moment is the tournament in miniature. Every charm he slipped into place, every alliance he forged in the shadows of the dungeons, every quiet adjustment to the maze or the dragons or the way the goblets spat out names, began with the same refusal that glinted in his eyes above the Black Lake. He would not accept that someone else's plan was immutable. Not Dumbledore, who had framed the tournament as tradition. Not the Ministry, who had wrapped it in parchment and signatures. Not Voldemort, who had assumed the boy at the center would only ever react. The grave was empty, where canon left his helplessness. In its place, he built a script. He chose the night of resurrection. He chose the witnesses. He chose how much of his own fear the world was allowed to see. The war did not simply happen to him, it unfolded along lines he had traced in advance as surely as those ripples once widened out from his hand on the lake. And somewhere inside that design lies an unsettling question. Where, in our own lives, do we accept unfair games because someone older, or louder, or more revered tells us the rules are sacred? Where are we already, quietly, testing the edges of those rules, wondering what it would cost to rewrite them, and who would pay that price if we did? Because power is not just spells and wands and shouted curses in graveyards. Power is the story we agree to inhabit. Lily was a charms prodigy, but even she could not craft a protection as absolute as narrative itself. Tonight, we stepped into a story where a child in green and silver inked his own terms into the margins and refused the part written for him. Every what if is a mirror. It does not only change fiction, it reveals what we fear we might do and what we secretly wish we would dare if the goblet ever flared blue and called our name. So as we fade from the black lake's surface and let the water still, carry that image with you. A boy, 4 sleeping figures, and a choice. The game is rigged. The ink is wet. And somewhere, in some quiet corner of your own story, the cup is already waiting. If you are ready to ask what else might change when the rules do, come back for the next question.